Divine right illusion. Throughout history, the idea that rulers are chosen, protected, or empowered by the divine has been one of the most powerful illusions humanity has ever lived under. The belief in divine right is not just a political trick. It is an entire worldview, a psychological framework that convinces entire populations that to resist authority is not only rebellion against a human king, but rebellion against the gods themselves. This belief transforms disobedience from a political act into a spiritual crime. And when a society believes that rulers can wield almost unlimited control, often without needing to lift a sword, the illusion of divine right works because it anchors power in the deepest fears and hopes of human beings, the fear of eternal punishment and the hope for divine favor. It suggests that kings, emperors, pharaohs, and even modern leaders are not just men, but vessels of something far greater. By dressing political authority in sacred clothing, rulers make obedience feel holy and resistance feel cursed. Consider the ancient Egyptians. The pharaoh was not merely a king, but seen as the living embodiment of Horus, the falcon god, and upon death he would become Osiris, lord of the underworld. His commands were not policies, they were cosmic decrees. To question the pharaoh's authority was to question the very order of the universe. The Nile, the harvest, the rising of the sun, all of these were believed to be linked to his divine essence. In this way, the people were locked into a cycle of reverence, devotion, and fear. They were not bowing to a man, they were bowing to a god walking among them. This illusion bound the Egyptian people together for millennia, building pyramids that were not just tombs but monuments to the eternal fusion of power and divinity. The same pattern can be seen across cultures. In medieval Europe, the doctrine of the divine right of kings declared that monarchs were chosen by God, and thus to disobey them was to sin against heaven. Kings like James I of England preached this doctrine openly, claiming their authority was absolute and untouchable. Even if a king was cruel, even if he abused his power, the people were taught that it was not their place to resist, because God would judge, not them. This doctrine created a psychological prison. The chain of command was no longer political but sacred, stretching from God's throne to the king's hand. Think of the enormous leverage this gave rulers. If peasants revolted, they were not just rebels, they were heretics. If nobles challenged authority, they could be painted as enemies of the divine order. This sacred shield gave kings the ability to crush dissent, often before it could even rise. In China, the mandate of heaven operated on a similar principle. Although it was not framed as absolute divine right, it claimed that heaven bestowed authority on just rulers. This created an illusion of cosmic legitimacy. Dynasties rose and fell under this principle, but during the reign of an emperor, as long as prosperity lasted, the people believed heaven itself supported him. And if natural disasters, famine, or defeat struck, people interpreted it as heaven withdrawing its mandate. Here again we see the blending of cosmic belief with earthly power, a system that made obedience feel righteous and disobedience feel dangerous until the illusion cracked under extreme circumstances. What makes the divine right illusion so powerful is not just theology, it is psychology. Human beings crave order, meaning, and protection. Life is uncertain, full of suffering, war, disease, and death. To believe that the leader is chosen by the gods creates a sense of safety, as though the chaos of life is under divine control. People want to trust that their suffering has purpose, that their loyalty is seen by higher powers, that their obedience guarantees some form of eternal reward. This emotional longing becomes the fuel of the illusion. It blinds people to exploitation, convinces them that their chains are sanctified, and persuades them to carry burdens willingly. Even today, echoes of the divine right illusion survive. Leaders may not always claim literal divine status, but they often cloak themselves in spiritual or moral authority. Political speeches invoke God's blessing, religious imagery sanctifies flags and armies, and dissent is still framed as not only disloyal but almost sinful. Consider how dictators throughout the 20th century used imagery of destiny, providence, and fate. Even in secular societies, the divine right illusion mutates into the belief that leaders are chosen by history itself, by destiny, or by the moral fabric of the universe. The core mechanism remains, to make resistance feel like blasphemy, betrayal, or treason not just against men but against something higher. When people believe that, they will tolerate suffering, oppression, and injustice longer than they otherwise would. They will build monuments for rulers who starve them. They will fight wars for kings who care little for their lives. They will kneel to crowns, thrones, and altars as though kneeling to the gods. And this is why the divine right illusion is not just a historical curiosity, it is a warning. It shows us how fragile the line is between faith and manipulation, between reverence and control. Once authority is cloaked in the sacred, it becomes extremely difficult to challenge without tearing at the very foundation of belief itself. But illusions do not last forever. The French Revolution tore apart the idea of divine right in Europe, fueled by thinkers who declared that power must come from the people, not from heaven. The American Revolution rejected monarchy entirely, replacing the sacred king with secular democracy. Yet even in these revolutions, we see that the pull of divine justification never fully disappears. Leaders still invoked providence, destiny, and God's will to justify their cause. Humanity seems to struggle to separate power from the sacred, because we instinctively want our leaders to be more than men. The divine right illusion, then, is not just about kings and gods. It is about the human tendency to sanctify authority, to wrap power in myth, to turn rulers into symbols of cosmic order. It is about how fear of blasphemy can keep people obedient, and how the hunger for meaning can make us complicit in our own subjugation. This is why understanding the illusion is vital. If we do not recognize how it works, we risk falling under its spell again and again in new forms. So the next time you hear a leader claim destiny, providence, or divine blessing, remember the pharaohs, the kings of Europe, the emperors of China. Remember how entire civilizations bowed under the weight of sacred illusions. And ask yourself whether obedience is truly holy, or whether it is simply the oldest illusion of power designed to keep you on your knees. Mirror loyalty technique. There is a method of ruling that is as subtle as it is powerful, a technique so effective that it rarely feels like domination at all. It is the mirror loyalty technique, the art of reflecting the values, beliefs, and very language of the people so that the ruler does not stand above them, but rather among them, as though he or she were simply one of their own. Unlike the heavy hand of tyranny or the distant aura of divine authority, this strategy works like a mirror, showing people their own image, convincing them that the ruler embodies their spirit, their traditions, and their dreams. And when people look into that mirror, they do not feel oppressed. They feel represented. They see themselves, and in seeing themselves, they give their loyalty freely. At its core, the mirror loyalty technique is a form of psychological resonance. Humans are naturally drawn to likeness, to familiarity. When someone speaks our language, not just in words but in tone, in rhythm, in the phrases of our culture, we feel trust. When someone adopts our values, affirms our struggles, and repeats our hopes back to us, it creates the illusion of unity, even if beneath the surface the ruler's intentions are entirely different. This is not just manipulation. It is one of the deepest strategies of political survival. To rule without constant rebellion, without needing to impose brute force, one must convince the ruled that their ruler is their reflection. History gives us countless examples. Consider the Roman emperors after the fall of the Republic. Augustus, the first emperor, carefully avoided the appearance of being a king. He called himself princeps, the first citizen, rather than a monarch. He dressed modestly, lived with restraint, and invoked the traditions of the Roman Republic even as he dismantled them piece by piece. He mirrored the values of the Roman Senate and people: duty, modesty, respect for old institutions, so they could believe he was simply protecting Rome's traditions rather than remaking them in his own image. In reality, he was establishing a dynasty. But because he mirrored Rome's values, his power was accepted, even praised, as though it were the people's will rather than his own ambition. We see the same technique in far more recent times. Leaders across revolutions and modern states have often risen not by imposing their ideology directly, but by wrapping it in the language of the people. Take populist leaders, whether in Latin America, Europe, or Asia, who adopt the slang of the streets, who wear the clothes of the workers, who pretend to eat and drink like ordinary men. They stand before the masses not as elites, though many of them come from privilege, but as one of the crowd. They speak of our struggle, our pride, our destiny. And because they mirror the identity of the people, they secure loyalty even when their policies exploit those very same citizens. One of the most striking features of the mirror loyalty technique is its ability to transform weakness into strength. A ruler who might otherwise appear alien or foreign can adopt the cultural mask of the people to erase difference. For instance, colonial administrators throughout history often dressed in local clothing, learned local customs, and adopted the language of the land. They played the part of belonging, of being insiders rather than outsiders. And by mirroring the local values, they could manipulate populations into cooperation, even into believing that the foreign ruler was somehow aligned with their traditions. It is deception elevated into an art. But make no mistake, this technique is not always conscious deceit. Some rulers genuinely absorb the culture they mirror. Yet whether it is conscious or unconscious, the effect is the same. People give loyalty not to the ruler themselves, but to the reflection of themselves they believe they see. This is why it is so effective. It bypasses rational thought and taps into identity, into the deepest human instinct to trust what feels familiar. We all seek to see ourselves in our leaders, and when that mirror is polished well enough, we forget to ask whether it is reflecting reality or simply projecting what we most want to see. Think of how dangerous this can be. A ruler skilled in the mirror loyalty technique can commit acts of exploitation or even brutality, and yet be forgiven, because the people believe the ruler is one of us. A man who mirrors the anger of the people can channel it into conquest. A woman who mirrors their hopes can tie them to endless sacrifice. When values are reflected back perfectly, loyalty becomes blind. And blind loyalty is the rawest form of power a ruler can ever hold. Psychologists have long studied the power of mirroring, even on the smallest scale. In a conversation, when one person subtly mirrors the gestures and tone of the other, trust increases. Salesmen use it to build rapport. Negotiators use it to soften opponents. Lovers use it unconsciously to bond. Scale that natural instinct to the size of a kingdom, an empire, or a nation, and you can see why entire populations can be lulled into obedience simply by hearing their own voice echoed back at them from the mouth of their ruler. It is also why many revolutions have been co-opted. At the beginning, leaders shout the slogans of the oppressed, mirror their language of freedom, justice, equality. They embody the rage and the dreams of the people. And when victory comes, when the old order is torn down, the leader who has mirrored the people does not step aside. They step into power. And often, that power becomes as corrupt and tyrannical as what came before. The mirror is turned back toward the people, showing them what they want to see, even as the reality diverges into something darker. The danger of this technique is that it is nearly invisible. Tyranny you can recognize. Divine authority you can question. But the mirror feels safe, familiar. It feels like the people are in control, because the ruler seems like one of them. But in truth, the mirror does not reflect the people. It captures them. It holds them in place, making them believe they are free when in fact they are being guided. The greatest form of control is not forcing obedience, but convincing people that obedience is the same as self-expression. This is why the mirror loyalty technique endures. It is subtle, it is persuasive, and it binds people not through chains or threats, but through identity itself. A ruler who can perfectly reflect the values and language of the people holds a power that armies cannot break and wealth cannot buy. The power of voluntary loyalty. That loyalty can build nations. It can also destroy them. For the people who see themselves in their rulers must always ask the harder question. Are we looking into a mirror, or are we staring into a mask designed to enslave us? Controlled orator hypnosis. Imagine standing in a crowd, surrounded by thousands of others, each face lit with expectation, each heart beating in rhythm not with their own thoughts, but with the pulse of the voice commanding their attention. A single figure on a stage, armed with nothing more than words, yet wielding them like weapons, like spells cast over the masses. This is the power of controlled orator hypnosis, the ancient and dangerous art of bending human minds through rhythm, tone, and repetition. It is not sorcery in the mystical sense, but it is sorcery in its effect, because the hypnotic cadence of speech can override reason, silence doubt, and transform ordinary men and women into willing instruments of another's will. Throughout history, rulers, prophets, and demagogues have relied on this weapon. Not the sword. Not the chain. But the voice. Controlled orator hypnosis begins with rhythm. Human beings are creatures of pattern, drawn to repetition and comforted by consistency. A heartbeat, a drumbeat, the chants of prayer, all of these engage the subconscious in ways that bypass logical reasoning. When an orator speaks with a deliberate rhythm, pausing at the right intervals, repeating certain phrases again and again, the human brain begins to fall into sync with that pattern. The words cease to be heard merely as information. They are felt as experience, as sound waves weaving into thought, creating an almost trance-like state. The orator, whether knowingly or instinctively, is manipulating the natural vulnerability of the human mind to rhythm. Think about religious rituals where priests chant in unison, repeating the same invocations until the listener is no longer questioning the meaning but merely surrendering to the sensation. Think about political rallies where slogans are repeated endlessly, the same words echoing until they no longer require analysis but simply become accepted truths. Think about military marches, the steady cadence of boots pounding in unison, accompanied by chants and calls that forge unity by suppressing individuality. All of these are facets of controlled orator hypnosis. They exploit the fact that humans, when confronted with rhythm, often stop resisting and start absorbing. But rhythm alone is not enough. The true mastery lies in repetition. The human brain learns through reinforcement, and the more a phrase is repeated, the more it imprints itself, no matter how absurd or false it may be. A lie repeated with conviction can carve itself deeper into memory than a truth spoken once. This is why orators with dangerous agendas often employ short, simple phrases, catchy, almost childish, stripped of complexity so that they can be remembered, chanted, and passed on. When a crowd begins to echo the orator, when their voices merge into one sound, the hypnosis has taken hold. At that moment, the orator is not just speaking to them, but through them, controlling their collective identity. Consider some of the most notorious figures in history. Adolf Hitler did not rise to power on the strength of policies alone. He was not merely a politician, he was a hypnotist of the masses. His speeches were carefully orchestrated performances, beginning slowly, almost conversationally, then rising in intensity, using repetition and rhythm until his audiences erupted in frenzied unity. He turned abstract grievances into burning passions, not through reasoned debate, but through incantation-like delivery. Joseph Goebbels, the architect of Nazi propaganda, understood this power intimately. He once said that a lie repeated often enough becomes truth. That is the essence of controlled orator hypnosis. It bypasses logic, seeps into the subconscious, and implants itself as belief. Yet it is not only tyrants who wield this weapon. Even in democratic societies, politicians use the same techniques, though often masked under the veil of modern marketing. Campaign slogans like, "Yes we can," or "Make America Great Again," are engineered with hypnotic simplicity. They are not detailed policies. They are rhythmic chants designed to lodge themselves in the brain, to be repeated until they define the identity of a movement. Whether for good or ill, the mechanism is the same. Rhythm and repetition hypnotize the crowd into unity, and unity often silences dissent. The danger of controlled orator hypnosis lies in how subtle it feels to those experiencing it. The crowd believes it is cheering because it agrees, but often it is cheering because it has been entrained. The rise and fall of the orator's voice, the predictable cadence, the familiar slogans, all of it builds an atmosphere where doubt feels impossible, where the individual is swept into the tide of the collective. The mind under hypnosis does not realize it is hypnotized. That is why this form of power is so dangerous. It cloaks manipulation in the illusion of choice. Psychologists who study crowd behavior note that the human mind in a mass gathering operates differently than when alone. Individual reasoning dissolves. Emotion amplifies. When guided by a skilled orator, crowds are capable of embracing ideas they would never accept in solitude. In the 20th century, entire nations marched into wars, endorsed genocides, and surrendered freedoms, not because each citizen rationally chose those paths, but because the hypnotic voices at the podiums bypassed reason and ignited something primal. The voice became a weapon sharper than steel, and its victims never even felt the cut. But this is not confined to the past. Even today, The principles of controlled orator hypnosis are alive in media, in advertising, in politics. Repeated jingles in commercials use rhythm to make us remember products we never cared about. News cycles hammer the same phrases into our minds until they feel like universal truths. Social media trends spread slogans at lightning speed, each repetition reinforcing the hypnosis of the collective. The ancient art of oratorical rhythm has merged with modern technology to create something even more powerful, a hypnosis without end, broadcast into our devices, surrounding us every hour of the day. So how can one resist? Awareness is the first shield. Once you know that rhythm and repetition are being used to shape your thoughts, you can begin to question instead of absorb. Ask yourself, am I agreeing because I believe, or because I have been told the same words 100 times? Am I moved by the truth of this speech, or by the way it was delivered? Real freedom of thought begins where hypnotic influence ends. To see the spell is to weaken its hold. Controlled orator hypnosis is not magic, but its effects can be magical in their scale. One voice can turn thousands into believers. One rhythm can make a nation march. One repeated phrase can shape the destiny of generations. And so, this technique remains one of the most dangerous tools of leadership, for it strips away individuality and replaces it with programmed obedience. History shows us its power. The present shows us its persistence. And the future will test whether humanity can learn to recognize when it is being lulled into sleep, or whether it will continue to dream the dreams planted by others, waking too late to realize whose voice was guiding them all along. Chain of favors trap. Imagine a chain that doesn't cut your skin or rattle when you walk. It's soft, warm, and padded with kindness. Each link is a favor that arrives just when you need it. A ride when your car breaks down, an introduction, a discount, a shortcut, a reassuring message on a lonely night. You didn't ask for most of them. They keep arriving until the chain feels like comfort, and then, quietly, it starts to feel like debt. This is the chain of favors trap, giving benefits in small doses so you feel forever indebted. It doesn't look like control, it looks like generosity. But tiny gifts trigger the rule of reciprocity, the foot in the door effect, and your urge to be consistent with your past yes. 1 IOU in your mind is harmless. 10 scattered across weeks, hum beneath your decisions. You stop saying yes because it's right and start saying yes because the ledger in your head is noisy. Picture Maya, a new hire. Her mentor, Raj, is endlessly helpful. He forwards a template, fixes a bug, offers tips before her presentation, and brings coffee on a late night. After a month he says, "Could you add me as a co-author on that design? I did share those slides. It's only a name on a doc." A week later, "Can you cover my on-call shift? I've been looking out for you." She hesitates, he smiles. "Don't worry, I'll owe you." The favors felt friendly, the asks feel compulsory. The link between kindness and obligation was welded while she wasn't looking. Now look at a relationship. Eli meets Dana, who never shows up empty-handed. One day it's a rideshare paid in advance, another day a playlist, a soup when Eli is sick, a surprise chore done. Then boundaries begin to slide. "Text me when you get home" becomes "share your location, I worry." Next week, "cancel your plans, I cooked your favorite." The ask rides in on the back of yesterday's favor. Eli resists, then remembers the soup, the ride, the errand, and the ledger whispers, "You owe." The relationship turns into a toll road, every mile costs consent. Why does this work? First, microgifts are cheap for the giver but expensive for the receiver's conscience. A small gift is easy to accept, but your internal ledger doesn't prorate obligation by cost, it just records that you were given something. Second, favors arrive on a variable schedule. You never know when the next kindness will drop, and unpredictability conditions you to wait for it, and behave for it. Third, each link is reasonable by itself. A big, sudden demand would alarm you. 6 tiny steps blur into one big movement, and by the time you notice, you're far from where you started. There is a corporate version. A manager hands out small privileges, early heads up on changes, flexibility in a crunch, access to a coveted project. The price appears later, loyalty that exceeds fairness. I went to bat for you, becomes the refrain that silences dissent. People stop raising real risks because they fear being ungrateful. Meetings fill with gratitude instead of truth. There is a family version. A parent rescues an adult child with rent money and heroic phone calls. Gratitude becomes compliance. Compliance becomes habit. Invitations turn into obligations. Advice becomes command. Good intentions don't erase controlling patterns, they hide them. Generosity isn't the villain. Healthy help is a bridge both people can walk across, not a toll road owned by the helper. The difference is pattern. In the trap, gifts are frequent enough to keep you indebted and selective enough to build a narrative, I do so much for you. That narrative is the leash. It edits memory so your contributions fade while their smallest efforts glow. If someone keeps a scrapbook of their kindness to you but cannot recall your kindness to them, you've found the leash. How do you tell if you're in it? Ask 3 questions. 1. Does help arrive with a subtle invoice? After all I've done, remember last time, you know I always look out for you? 2. Does a tiny refusal trigger guilt like a betrayal? 3. Does the person reduce your autonomy while calling it care? If every yes buys you less freedom tomorrow, that's custody, not care. If you suspect the trap, name it. Slow drip indebtedness. Names break spells. Then make the ledger visible. Write down favors given and received for a month. Many discover they give more than they remember. If the ledger still leans toward them, repay once in a way that closes the account. Say, I appreciate your help with X and Y. I'm returning the kindness with A and B, and after this I want our support to be clean and present tense. You are not attacking, you're wiping a fogged window. Next, install a symmetry rule. For every help you receive, ask for a small help back within the same week. People who are genuinely generous accept symmetry. People who trade favors for control protest the math. Their reaction is your data. Practice the neutral no. Not angry, not apologizing. No, I can't do that. If they reach for the ledger, reach for the truth. I'm grateful for what you've done. Gratitude is not a contract. Repeat it until your tongue believes it. Remember, the faster someone reminds you of their past gifts, the more they've converted generosity into currency. Use time boundaries. Acts of kindness have a half-life. After a reasonable period, the obligation to reciprocate decays to 0. You get to define that half-life. Perhaps 30 days for small favors, a season for major support. If someone brings up last year's favor to claim today's compliance, they're not keeping a memory, they're keeping a mortgage. Another story. A startup sought an investor famous for rolling up his sleeves. He sent introductions, casual advice, a few late-night edits. When term sheet time arrived, he added a clause giving him veto power on hires. I've been in the trenches with you, he said. The founders felt the chain tighten. They paused, wrote a grateful note, and countered, remove the veto, add scheduled updates, take a standard board role. He pushed back, reminding them of his help. They answered, we've built the product and found the customers. We want partnership, not permission. He accepted. The chain held only as long as they treated gratitude as debt. If you're the one using slow drip favors, maybe without meaning to, ask what outcome you fear. People reach for control when they doubt their value without it. Try a different currency, clarity and consent. Offer help with no trailing string. Say, this is a gift, not an invoice. Mean it. If you need something, ask cleanly and accept no as an answer. Control spoils generosity. Consent preserves it. If this chain appears alongside gaslighting, isolation, or financial coercion, get outside perspective. Manipulation thrives in private rooms. Tell the story to someone outside the narrative, a colleague on another team, a friend who doesn't know the giver, a counselor. If saying it out loud makes you feel smaller, add facts. If facts make the pattern obvious, add boundaries. If boundaries are punished, add distance. A true favor frees you. It expands your options tomorrow. A chain of favors narrows them, one velvet link at a time. The test is simple. After accepting help, do you feel more able to say no, or less? If the answer is less, you're not being cared for, you're being curated. Cut the chain. Thank the kindness, close the ledger, and step into a life where generosity is a bridge again, not a leash. Fear-pity oscillation. The strategy of fear-pity oscillation is one of the most psychologically effective tools ever wielded by rulers, tyrants, and manipulators throughout history. It is a cycle designed to keep the masses in a permanent state of confusion and dependency, never fully secure, never fully broken, but suspended between terror and relief. Imagine a ruler who orders a public execution in the town square, displaying unimaginable cruelty, sending a message that disobedience will be met with merciless punishment. The people tremble, their spirits collapse under the weight of dread. And yet, only days later, the same ruler pardons a criminal, spares a life, or distributes alms to the poor. Suddenly, that same figure who was once a monster seems capable of mercy, compassion, even generosity. The people, caught in the whiplash between these extremes, do not know where to anchor their emotions. This constant shifting ensures that their loyalty is bound not by reason, but by raw, unstable emotion. The genius of fear-pity oscillation lies in its unpredictability. If power were always cruel, people might eventually learn to steel themselves, resist, or even revolt out of sheer hopelessness. If power were always merciful, it might be taken for granted, and authority could be weakened. But when cruelty and mercy are interwoven, the people cannot prepare for what comes next. They are trapped in a state of vigilance, always waiting, always uncertain, never allowed to relax. This psychological instability makes them malleable, more willing to obey, more desperate to cling to the hope of kindness, even when that kindness is rare and conditional. Consider the example of the Roman emperors, who often used gladiatorial games as both spectacle and psychological warfare. A condemned man might be forced into the arena, sentenced to be torn apart by beasts. The audience, already primed with fear, watches with dread. But at the very last moment, the emperor could lift his thumb and grant mercy. The crowd erupts in gratitude. The emperor is suddenly not just feared, but adored. The power of life and death demonstrated so publicly bound the people closer to him, not out of logic, but out of emotional whiplash. They could never predict his decisions, and so they revered him even more. This same technique has echoed through modern politics and leadership. Think of dictators who purge entire groups with ruthless violence, instilling terror into the hearts of millions. Yet those same figures appear on television embracing children, handing out food, smiling like benevolent guardians. The people watching cannot reconcile the brutality with the mercy, and so they surrender to the illusion of complexity. He must be strict, but also caring, they rationalize. Perhaps the cruelty is necessary, perhaps the mercy proves he is human. By oscillating between extremes, the ruler positions himself as both executioner and savior, father and destroyer, leaving no room for consistent judgment. Psychologists have long studied the effects of intermittent reinforcement, the idea that unpredictable rewards create the strongest form of conditioning. In gambling, for instance, the unpredictability of a win keeps players hooked. The same principle applies to governance through fear-pity oscillation. The people are punished unpredictably, but occasionally rewarded, and this keeps them hooked on the ruler's approval. The cruelty keeps them submissive, while the mercy makes them grateful, even for the smallest crumbs of kindness. This is not accidental, it is deliberate manipulation of the human psyche, exploiting our need for stability by constantly denying it. Imagine living under such a rule. One day, your neighbor is dragged away for speaking too freely, his family left destitute. You and others are horrified, terrified that the same fate could strike you at any moment. And then, the very next day, the ruler announces a tax forgiveness for struggling farmers. Relief floods your heart. You whisper to yourself, perhaps he is not as cruel as I thought. That emotional roller coaster, repeated over and over, breaks down resistance more effectively than sheer force. It teaches you to look at your ruler not with clarity, but with desperate hope and trembling fear. Even in families and smaller power dynamics, this method appears. A parent who alternates between harsh punishment and sudden affection creates children who grow anxious and dependent, always uncertain of where they stand. The child becomes more obedient, not out of respect, but out of a desperate desire to avoid pain while clinging to moments of love. In abusive relationships, the cycle is the same: cruelty followed by apology, punishment followed by tenderness. The victim is trapped, confused, emotionally dependent on the very figure who harms them. This microcosm reflects the same tactics used on a grand political scale. History has also shown how this oscillation can prolong regimes that might otherwise crumble. A purely cruel ruler often sparks rebellion, while a purely merciful one may invite exploitation. But the ruler who masterfully blends cruelty with mercy can outlast them all, because the people are too destabilized to unite. They cannot predict whether rebellion will bring harsher punishment or unexpected mercy. The cycle ensures division, hesitation, and paralysis. Think of medieval kings who burned dissenters alive, only to later pardon others in a grand gesture of faith. Or modern leaders who lock up opponents while simultaneously funding public celebrations. Each act of fear is carefully balanced with an act of pity. Not because the leader has a conscience, but because the people must never feel certain. Certainty is dangerous. It breeds organization, resistance, clarity. Uncertainty breeds compliance. The emotional toll on the people is immense. Living in a world where punishment and mercy collide unpredictably, they develop a kind of learned helplessness. They no longer ask why things happen, only when the next blow or blessing will fall. Their judgment dulls, their critical thinking weakens, their survival instincts push them to cling tighter to the very source of their suffering. They begin to rationalize cruelty, excuse tyranny, and even praise the ruler for mercy that should have been their natural right all along. Fear-pity oscillation is not just a tactic of ancient empires or brutal dictatorships, it is a timeless method of control. Whenever you see power wielded with sudden swings between ruthless severity and generous mercy, you are witnessing this psychological manipulation in action. It is a game of emotions, a dance of contradictions, designed to keep people off balance, submissive, and grateful for crumbs of compassion. And the terrifying truth is that once this cycle is established, it becomes nearly unbreakable. People begin to crave the mercy so much that they will endure endless cruelty just to taste it again. The lesson is clear. Fear-pity oscillation is not about justice, morality, or governance. It is about domination through emotional instability. By alternating between punishments and mercies, leaders do not simply control actions, they seize the very core of human emotions. And as long as people remain trapped in that cycle, trembling at the lash one moment and praising the hand that spares them the next, true freedom will always remain out of reach. Peace promise delay. Throughout human history, rulers and governments have mastered the art of dangling promises before their people. Perhaps the most potent of these is the promise of peace, delayed and delayed, always kept just out of reach. The illusion works like this. Leaders assure their citizens that after this next war, after this one more campaign, after this single necessary sacrifice, there will finally be rest. They say the blood spilled today will secure a brighter tomorrow. They whisper that every hardship, every ration, every broken family, every battlefield death is simply the price to guarantee future generations a world free of war. And so the people endure, clinging to that vision of peace. But the promise never arrives. It is endlessly postponed, replaced by new enemies, new conflicts, new reasons to fight. The horizon of peace remains forever distant. This tactic, this cycle of peace promised and peace delayed, is not new. Think of the Roman Empire. Emperors promised their citizens the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, yet that peace was built on almost constant conquest. To secure the empire's safety, Rome said it needed to subdue its neighbors. Once Gaul was conquered, then peace would come. Once Carthage was destroyed, then peace would come. Once the borders were expanded to the Rhine and the Danube, then peace would come. And yet Rome never stopped marching, never stopped bleeding, never stopped demanding sacrifices. Each promise of peace was a mirage that kept soldiers loyal and citizens compliant, while the machinery of expansion turned endlessly. The same pattern repeated in the 20th century. During the First World War, governments told their citizens that the war to end all wars was at hand. Sacrifice now, they said, and the future will be free of conflict forever. Men marched into the trenches believing that their suffering would secure lasting peace. And yet, only 2 decades later, the world was plunged into an even greater inferno, World War II. Once again, the promise was made: defeat the Axis powers, endure one more round of suffering, and peace would reign. Cities were bombed, millions were displaced, entire nations were scarred. And after victory came the Cold War, another era of endless tension, arms races, and proxy battles. Peace was always promised. Peace was always delayed. This illusion works because people desperately long for peace. War is exhausting, brutal, and costly. It drains economies, destroys families, and shatters spirits. But if leaders admitted that war would never end, that conflict was a permanent state, people would rise in anger. They would reject endless sacrifice. And so the illusion is maintained. Leaders insist that the next war is the last one, the final step before rest, the last chapter in a story of struggle that leads inevitably to harmony. They say peace requires just a little more patience, just a little more loyalty, just a little more blood. The psychology behind this illusion is powerful. Human beings can endure extraordinary suffering if they believe it is temporary. Soldiers can march through mud and fire if they think the war will be over by Christmas. Families can tolerate shortages if they believe their children will inherit peace. Citizens can accept surveillance, censorship, and taxes if they believe it is all building toward a final victory. The promise of peace functions as a light in the darkness, a dream strong enough to keep people walking through hell. And rulers know this. They exploit it, stretching the illusion just far enough to prevent despair, always keeping hope alive but never fulfilled. Consider how often the phrase, peace talks, is used as a political tool. Ceasefires, treaties, summits, all of these are dangled as signs that peace is near. But behind the scenes, militaries are rebuilt, strategies are drawn, new conflicts are prepared. The promise becomes a cycle. Fight, bleed, hope, repeat. The people are taught to endure one more round of suffering, to trust that peace is almost here, to silence their doubts for fear of being seen as disloyal. To question the war is to risk being accused of betraying the promised peace itself. This is why the peace promise delay is not just a political lie, it is a psychological trap. It keeps entire nations locked in cycles of obedience, unable to resist because they believe relief is always just around the corner. It keeps them compliant because to stop fighting now would mean all past sacrifices were wasted. No one wants to believe that their loved ones died for nothing, that their suffering was meaningless. So they accept the illusion, even when it is clear that the promise has been broken again and again. Even in our time, we hear leaders say that the next operation, the next intervention, the next military campaign will finally bring stability. They assure us that peace requires only one more war, one more show of strength, one more sacrifice. And yet, history shows that peace rarely comes from endless conflict. Instead, the promise of peace becomes a tool to sustain power, to prevent rebellion, to justify suffering, and to extend wars far beyond their natural lifespan. The tragedy is that people, in their longing for peace, become the very instruments of their own exploitation. They march, they fight, they pay, they wait, believing that the horizon is just a step away. But the horizon never arrives. Peace remains forever postponed, always promised, always delayed. And the rulers who perpetuate the illusion grow stronger, feeding on the sacrifices of generations. The peace promise delay is not just a tactic of war. It is a mirror held up to human hope. It shows us how our dreams of peace, our desperation for an end to suffering, can be twisted into chains. It is one of the oldest illusions of power, the promise of tomorrow used to control today. And until we learn to recognize it, to see through the endless cycle of deferred promises, we risk living forever in wars disguised as preludes to peace. Divide and distract method. There is a weapon of power older than any sword, sharper than any spear, and more enduring than any fortress. It is the divide and distract method, the deliberate strategy of setting groups against one another, keeping them so busy fighting amongst themselves that they never turn their eyes upward, never question the throne, and never unite against the true source of their oppression. It is a method as old as civilization itself, and yet it remains one of the most effective tools of authority. For when people are divided, they are weak, and when they are distracted, they are blind. The brilliance of the divide and distract method is that it doesn't require chains or armies to keep people under control. It doesn't demand constant surveillance or endless force. Instead, it manipulates the natural tensions already present in society: ethnic differences, class rivalries, religious conflicts, political factions, and amplifies them until they consume the people entirely. A divided population spends its energy on internal struggles, leaving the ruler free to govern, exploit, and even corrupt without challenge. In fact, the more chaotic the divisions, the more secure the ruler becomes, for unity is the one thing every ruler fears. History is littered with examples. The Roman Empire, in its long reign, perfected this art. The emperors understood that if the people were entertained, distracted, and divided, they would not rebel. Hence the famous phrase, "bread and circuses." Give the masses food and endless spectacles, gladiatorial games, chariot races, theatrical dramas, and they will focus their passion on rival teams and performers rather than the corruption of the Senate or the decadence of the emperor. Whole factions of citizens would bleed in the streets fighting over which charioteer should win, while the empire itself rotted from within. That is the genius of distraction, the illusion of meaning in trivial conflicts, while the real battles go unchallenged. But the Roman example is only the surface. Consider the colonial powers of the modern age. The British Empire, for instance, used divide and distract in countless territories. In India, religious and caste divisions were deepened and manipulated, so that Hindus and Muslims, high caste and low caste, fought bitterly among themselves. This prevented unity against the colonial rulers. By highlighting differences, by encouraging rivalries, by subtly rewarding one group over another, the empire ensured that its rule remained intact. The logic was simple. If the people are at war with each other, they will never unite in war against their occupier. And even when independence came, the divisions that had been cultivated exploded into conflict, leaving wounds that last to this very day. The method does not always require violence. Distraction itself can be enough. Leaders throughout history have flooded their people with diversions, grand festivals, gossip about scandals, endless debates about cultural or moral controversies, anything to keep the population's attention away from the corruption of the ruling elite. The more trivial the distraction, the more effective it becomes, because the people's minds are consumed with outrage over details rather than outrage over oppression. This is why rulers sponsor entertainment, why tyrants tolerate feuds, why empires fund distractions. It is not generosity, it is strategy. In modern times, the divide and distract method is alive and well. Political leaders pit classes against one another, urban against rural, rich against poor, left against right, so that citizens tear each other down while the true structures of wealth and power remain untouched. Media is flooded with endless controversies, trivial spectacles, celebrity scandals, designed to keep people in a state of permanent outrage without focus. Meanwhile, laws are passed, wealth is extracted, and freedoms are eroded quietly in the background. The people feel busy, active, even passionate, but they are only pawns in a carefully constructed distraction. The psychology behind this method is simple yet devastating. Human beings crave belonging. We seek identity in groups, our religion, our tribe, our nation, our ideology. And where there is identity, there is rivalry. All a clever ruler must do is feed that rivalry, emphasize difference, nurture competition, until the groups become so invested in defeating each other that they forget to notice the strings being pulled from above. A divided society can be controlled with whispers. A united society can topple an empire. But the most chilling aspect of the divide and distract method is how easily it is accepted by the people themselves. Many will insist that their rivalries are natural, that their distractions are meaningful. They will fight with all their strength to defend their faction, never realizing that in doing so, they are defending the very authority that exploits them. In this sense, the method becomes self-sustaining. Once the divisions are strong enough, the ruler does not even need to interfere. The people keep themselves busy, trapped in the endless loop of rivalry and distraction, while power remains unchallenged above. Look closely at any society in decline, and you will find this pattern. Groups tearing each other apart over culture, over class, over religion, over politics, while the wealthy and powerful sit untouched. It is not chaos, it is design. For the greatest secret of authority is this: you do not need to conquer a people if they are already conquering themselves. You do not need to silence them if they are too busy shouting at each other to ever hear the truth. Division becomes the cage, distraction becomes the chain, and the people themselves become the jailers of their own freedom. This is why the divide and distract method endures. It is cheap, it is subtle, and it is devastatingly effective. A ruler who masters it does not need to fear rebellion, for the rebels will fight each other before they ever unite against the throne. A people consumed by rivalry cannot see their true enemy, and a society lost in distraction cannot see that its chains have already been locked. Enemy demonization ritual. Picture a world where disagreement is no longer just an alternative opinion, but a moral crime. A world where opponents are not simply rivals to be debated, but enemies to be destroyed. This is the world created by the enemy demonization ritual, one of the most powerful techniques ever used by rulers, movements, and regimes to solidify their control. It works by transforming dissent into treason, by turning human beings into monsters, by reducing complex opponents into symbols of evil so stark, so absolute, that any sympathy for them feels like betrayal. The ritual of demonization is not just about language, it is about reshaping the psychological battlefield. When people are convinced that their leader's enemies are not merely wrong but fundamentally wicked, then obedience becomes not just loyalty but virtue. To doubt becomes to sin. The process begins with simplification. Human beings are complicated, their motives tangled, their actions open to interpretation. But complexity does not rally crowds. What rallies crowds is clarity. The demonization ritual takes a person or a group and strips them of nuance. They are no longer fathers, mothers, workers, thinkers, or citizens. They become symbols, caricatures, personifications of danger. They are the traitors, the heretics, the infidels, the enemies of the people. Once given such a label, all their individuality disappears. They exist only as shadows cast against the brightness of the leader's authority. From there, repetition and ritual enforce the image. Slogans are created, speeches are delivered, symbols are spread. Every failure of the state, every fear in society, is projected onto the chosen enemy. Crops fail? Blame the enemy. Economic hardship? The enemy is sabotaging us. Fear of war? The enemy is plotting against us. By placing every anxiety into the figure of the enemy, leaders build unity among the masses. People may be suffering, but at least they have someone to hate together. Hatred becomes a bomb, a drug, a shared ritual that reinforces loyalty to the leader. History is drenched in examples of this ritual. Consider the witch hunts of early modern Europe. Communities struggling with famine, disease, and uncertainty found an outlet in the demonization of so-called witches. Ordinary women became symbols of evil, agents of the devil himself. Once demonized, their fates were sealed. To doubt the hunts was to risk being branded a witch yourself. The ritual of demonization made dissent impossible, because any sympathy for the accused was indistinguishable from guilt. Move forward to the 20th century, and you see the same pattern magnified. In Nazi Germany, Jews were demonized not as individuals but as a demonic collective force. Propaganda painted them as parasites, corruptors, conspirators plotting the downfall of the nation. This was not just political rivalry, it was existential. To question the campaign against Jews was to question the very survival of Germany, to risk being labeled a traitor. The demonization ritual prepared ordinary citizens to accept atrocities they would never have imagined possible. It cloaked mass murder in the language of moral duty. And yet this technique is not confined to totalitarian regimes. Even in democracies, enemy demonization finds its way into campaigns and media. Political opponents are not merely criticized for their policies, but branded as threats to the nation, enemies of freedom, puppets of sinister forces. The language of evil is easier than the language of debate. When people are told their opponent is corrupt, dangerous, or even inhuman, then compromise feels impossible, and unity around the chosen leader feels righteous. This is the same ancient ritual, adapted for modern stages. The ritual is strengthened by emotion. Fear is the foundation, anger the fuel, and disgust the binding agent. Once an opponent is associated with corruption, disease, or treachery, the human instinct to reject them is nearly automatic. Leaders understand this instinct. They do not just attack opponents with facts. They attack them with images and symbols that tap into primal emotions. Consider the use of caricatures in propaganda. Enemies drawn with grotesque features, monstrous qualities, dehumanized until they appear less like people and more like beasts. The crowd sees these images, hears the speeches, absorbs the slogans, and soon the thought of compassion feels unnatural. The ritual is complete when hatred feels like morality. But the danger of enemy demonization goes beyond propaganda. It corrodes the very ability of a society to reason. When every problem is explained through the existence of a demonized enemy, there is no incentive to seek real solutions. Leaders can remain in power, not by solving crises, but by endlessly pointing to their chosen scapegoats. It is a cycle that sustains itself until the enemy is destroyed, or until a new one must be created. And in many cases, even destruction is not enough. The French Revolution saw nobles and priests demonized as enemies of liberty. Yet once they were executed, suspicion turned inward, and new enemies were invented: moderates, rivals, even fellow revolutionaries. The ritual demands sacrifice, and if no external demon exists, it will create internal ones. Think about the psychological impact on the ordinary person living within such a system. To disagree is to expose oneself. To doubt is to risk being labeled. The demonization ritual forces silence, because speaking out becomes indistinguishable from siding with the enemy. It isolates individuals, leaving them unable to find allies in their doubts, because each suspects the other of betrayal. In this silence, fear thrives, and the leader's power becomes absolute. Even today, in the modern world, the technique remains alive. In political debates, watch how easily opponents are painted not as humans with flawed ideas, but as villains threatening the very fabric of society. In conflicts, entire ethnic groups are branded as aggressors or traitors, with no distinction between guilty and innocent. Online, opponents are demonized with hashtags, memes, and viral narratives, repeated until they form unshakable collective perceptions. The ritual has simply adapted to new platforms, but its essence is unchanged. Create an enemy, strip them of humanity, and declare that opposing them is treason against the collective. The enemy demonization ritual is powerful because it works on something ancient inside us: the need for belonging and the fear of betrayal. When we are told that our leader is defending us from monsters, we cling closer. When we are told that dissenters aid those monsters, we recoil from them. Step by step, rational thought dissolves, replaced by the comforting clarity of good versus evil. And in that clarity, leaders find the obedience they crave. To resist this ritual requires courage and awareness. It requires the ability to see an opponent as human even when every voice around you insists they are demonic. It requires the willingness to question whether the evil you are told to fear is real, or whether it has been crafted to keep you loyal. This is not easy, because the ritual is designed to make questioning itself dangerous. But history teaches that those who resist the demonization ritual, who insist on seeing complexity where others see caricatures, are often the last barrier against tyranny. The enemy demonization ritual has toppled civilizations, fueled wars, and justified atrocities. It will continue to appear wherever leaders seek to rule through fear rather than wisdom. The faces of the enemies may change, but the ritual remains the same. A leader points, the crowd condemns, and dissent dies in silence. The question is whether we will recognize the ritual when it happens again, or whether, like so many before us, we will join the chorus, chanting against the demon our leaders have created, blind to the fact that in the ritual of demonization, it is not only the enemy who is destroyed. It is the truth itself. Eternal legacy trap. Imagine being told that your life is not just your own, that you are a chosen piece in a cosmic puzzle, and that your struggles, your sacrifices, even your obedience, are feeding into a story far larger than you. That is the eternal legacy trap, convincing people that they are part of a grand destiny that only the ruler, leader, or ideology can complete. It feels noble, uplifting, intoxicating. But beneath the poetry, it's a form of binding, an invisible leash woven out of meaning itself. This trap thrives on one of the deepest human desires, the need to matter beyond death. A ruler whispers, "Your actions today echo in eternity. Follow me, and you will be remembered. Oppose me, and you will vanish, forgotten." The subject isn't just serving orders anymore, they are securing a place in an everlasting legacy. The ruler positions themselves as the guardian of that legacy, the architect of immortality. Without them, the subject's contribution is meaningless dust. Take history as an example. Ancient emperors claimed to be divine sons of heaven. Soldiers marching into hopeless battles were told they were laying bricks for the eternal empire. In truth, their lives were extinguished for territory, but the story they believed made death look like transcendence. Even in modern times, political movements tell followers that they are on the right side of history, a phrase that binds loyalty not to results in the present but to an imagined, glowing future. The legacy becomes the bait, obedience becomes the hook. In religion, too, this pattern appears. Leaders have promised eternal salvation, not as a universal gift, but as a prize tied to loyalty, devotion, and obedience to them specifically. "I am the gate," they declare. Without the leader, the afterlife, the cosmic destiny, or the prophesied utopia is locked away. The believer doesn't just fear punishment, they fear irrelevance in the grand tapestry of existence. Consider a workplace example. A charismatic CEO tells their employees, "We are not just building software. We are changing humanity forever." Decades from now, people will look back at this company as the turning point, and your names will be etched into history. The rhetoric sounds inspiring. But beneath it is a subtle extraction, longer hours, unpaid sacrifices, devotion beyond reasonable limits, all justified because to resist would be to step out of destiny itself. Legacy makes overwork look like heroism. Psychologically, the eternal legacy trap exploits three levers. First is immortality anxiety, the fear of being forgotten. People want their lives to ripple beyond their graves. Second is dependency, the belief that only the leader has the master key to turn their efforts into immortality. Third is sunk cost. Once you've poured years into the grand story, leaving feels like betraying history itself, not just yourself. The ruler doesn't need chains. The story itself holds you in place. Look at how cults operate. A guru may tell followers that together they are birthing the dawn of a new humanity, but only if they remain under his vision. Each small act, donations, sacrifices, loyalty tests, is framed as laying the foundation for eternity. When someone doubts, they are shamed not as selfish, but as traitors to destiny itself. This is the brilliance of the trap. Rebellion feels like cosmic treason, and obedience feels like eternal purpose. The trap is hard to detect because it flatters you. It doesn't demean, it elevates. You are not just a cog, you are a chosen cog. You are not just serving power, you are immortalizing yourself. That's the hook. People rarely question a story that makes them feel bigger than they are. But the question to ask is, bigger by whose design? If your eternity only exists through another person's gatekeeping, then you are not being elevated, you are being owned. To break free, you must reclaim authorship of your meaning. Legacies don't belong to rulers, they belong to actions. A soldier who dies defending civilians is remembered regardless of whether the empire survives. An artist who paints truth is remembered regardless of whether the movement collapses. A worker who builds with integrity leaves a legacy in every mind touched, not just in the grand narrative of a CEO. The truth is this, you do not need a ruler to immortalize you. Your legacy is the ripple of your choices, not the monument of their empire. Imagine two paths. On the first, you pledge to the leader's destiny, and when they fall, as all rulers eventually do, your story evaporates with theirs. On the second, you choose your own compass. Maybe fewer statues are built, maybe fewer slogans echo, but what endures is authenticity. Legacies built through obedience rot when the throne collapses. Legacies built through integrity survive even in silence. The eternal legacy trap seduces because it sounds like poetry, but in practice it is a cage. It asks you to surrender your meaning to someone else's script. The test is simple. If your supposed legacy cannot exist without the ruler, then it is not truly eternal. It is rented purpose, paid for with your freedom. The ruler doesn't own the future. You do, with every act that ripples beyond you. To see this is to step outside the trap, to reclaim your right to matter without permission. That is the only legacy that cannot be stolen. Lavish loyalty spectacle. Lavish loyalty spectacle is one of the most dazzling and deceptive tools of control in human history, a stage play of power where extravagance is weaponized to blind the masses. At its core, this technique is about creating overwhelming displays of wealth, grandeur, and generosity, not because the people are truly being elevated, but because their awe distracts them from the chains tightening around their necks. The ruler who employs this strategy knows that human beings are deeply moved by spectacle. Our eyes widen at gold, our hearts swell at music, and our spirits are stirred when we feel part of something greater than ourselves. And so, through pageantry, parades, and monumental ceremonies, power transforms oppression into illusion, exploitation into celebration. Imagine a king who levies unbearable taxes, draining peasants of their last grain, their last coin. These people groan under the burden of hunger and poverty. But then, on a grand festival day, the same king throws open the palace gates, inviting the crowds to witness a feast unlike anything they could ever imagine. Golden chalices, roasted meats, fountains flowing with wine. Musicians play, dancers swirl, fire and light dazzle the senses. For one brief moment, the people are lifted out of their misery, intoxicated not with wine but with belonging. They feel that their suffering has a purpose, that they are part of a kingdom so magnificent that even their sacrifices seem justified. This is the genius of the lavish loyalty spectacle. It transforms resentment into admiration, and deprivation into devotion. History offers endless examples. Consider the Roman bread and circuses. Emperors ensured that even the poorest citizens were fed enough grain to survive, while the Colosseum roared with games that stunned the senses. Gladiators fought, exotic animals clashed, ships sailed in artificially flooded arenas. These spectacles were not acts of kindness, they were acts of control. The people, enthralled by the grandeur, forgot the corruption and exploitation that drained the empire's coffers. Their anger was pacified by entertainment. As long as the ruler kept the stage dazzling, the crowd remained loyal. The same technique appeared in the courts of European monarchs. Versailles under Louis XIV was not just a palace, it was a theater of power. Nobles were invited to bask in the Sun King's glory, distracted by balls, concerts, gardens, and endless rituals of luxury. The sheer extravagance masked the crushing weight of taxation on commoners and the iron fist of centralized authority. Nobles competed for scraps of attention in ceremonies of gold and silk, forgetting that they were, in truth, prisoners of spectacle. Even in the modern world, this method thrives. Dictators hold colossal parades with rows of soldiers marching in unison, missiles displayed like ornaments, and flags stretching endlessly across the horizon. Leaders wave to oceans of people while fireworks explode overhead. On the surface, it looks like unity, prosperity, and power. But beneath, it is a smokescreen, an orchestrated performance that convinces the masses that their ruler is invincible, generous, and glorious, even as their freedoms are stripped away. Lavish loyalty spectacles make oppression feel like celebration, turning the chains of obedience into shining ornaments. Psychologically, this strategy preys upon two human vulnerabilities: awe and gratitude. When people are overwhelmed by beauty, size, or abundance, their critical thinking dulls. They become more susceptible to suggestion, more willing to submit. And when the ruler frames the spectacle as a gift, an act of generosity from the throne, the people feel gratitude rather than resentment, even if it was their own wealth, their own labor, that funded the display in the first place. It is a cycle of exploitation disguised as benevolence. The people give everything, and then thank their ruler when a fraction is returned in dazzling form. Think of how festivals and national holidays are often used. A ruler may face scandals, corruption, or unrest. But with one grand celebration, one dazzling display of fireworks, one massive public concert, the people are swept into collective euphoria. For a brief moment, their grievances are silenced, drowned out by spectacle. This emotional surge creates a kind of false unity, where citizens mistake shared amazement for shared prosperity. The exploitation remains, but it is hidden under layers of music, banners, and glittering lights. Even in workplaces and organizations, this tactic appears in miniature. A company might hold an extravagant party or retreat, giving employees a temporary taste of luxury. For a day, the workers feel valued, celebrated. But behind the stage lights and free champagne, the same grueling exploitation persists. The loyalty spectacle has done its work, it has bought gratitude and suppressed resentment. The danger of this method lies in how effective it is at rewriting memory. People may forget months of suffering if one night of spectacle burns brightly enough. They may forgive endless injustices if the ruler can dazzle them with a parade, a feast, or a concert that makes them feel proud, included, or special. Over time, they begin to equate loyalty not with justice, but with awe. They stop asking for fairness, and instead crave the next spectacle. Lavish loyalty spectacles are not harmless entertainment. They are calculated manipulations, designed to convert suffering into devotion, taxation into gratitude, oppression into pride. They pacify the masses not with truth, but with illusion, keeping them enthralled by lights and sound while their freedoms slip quietly into the shadows. And so the lesson is this: whenever power showers its people with displays of magnificence, we must ask what lies behind the curtain. What pain, what exploitation, what injustice is being hidden beneath the glitter? For in the end, the most dangerous chains are not forged of iron, but of wonder, awe, and the dazzling glow of loyalty purchased through spectacle. Justice theater illusion. Throughout the ages, rulers have understood that raw power alone is never enough. People may bow to force for a time, but sooner or later they demand fairness, order, and justice. And so, to keep control, the powerful devised one of the most enduring illusions in human history: the theater of justice. This illusion convinces people that trials are fair, that courts are impartial, that verdicts are shaped by truth alone, when in reality the outcomes are carefully manipulated behind the curtain. Public trials are staged like grand performances, designed not to find justice but to legitimize power. The court becomes a stage, the judge a director, the witnesses and lawyers mere actors, all reciting lines to convince the audience, the people, that fairness has been served. Why does this illusion work so effectively? Because humans crave justice almost as deeply as they crave food and shelter. We want to believe there is a balance in the world, that wrongdoers are punished and the innocent protected. Without this belief, society descends into chaos. The illusion of justice provides stability, even if the justice itself is false. By staging trials, rulers give the people a performance they can watch, a ritual they can trust, a narrative they can cling to. The courtroom becomes a symbolic temple of fairness. And once people believe in the ritual, they stop questioning the outcome. Consider the show trials of the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin. These were not trials in the true sense of the word, but elaborate political performances. Old revolutionaries, military leaders, intellectuals, all were paraded before the court, accused of crimes they never committed. The verdicts were already decided, the confessions often extracted through torture or threats. Yet the trials were broadcast, transcribed, and staged with great theatrical flair. The audience saw seemingly rational procedures, prosecutors presenting evidence, defendants making statements, judges issuing rulings. To the uninformed, it looked like justice in motion. In reality, it was theater, carefully orchestrated to eliminate enemies and solidify power while maintaining the illusion that law and order prevailed. The same illusion has surfaced in monarchies, dictatorships, and even democracies. During the reign of Henry VIII of England, trials of political opponents and even wives accused of treason or adultery were little more than elaborate performances. Anne Boleyn, for instance, was condemned by a jury that had no freedom to acquit her. The spectacle of a trial gave the illusion that her execution was lawful and just, when in truth it was a political necessity dressed in the costume of fairness. By staging the process, the king shielded himself from accusations of tyranny, convincing the public that justice, not vengeance, had been served. The justice theater illusion is powerful because it not only silences dissent, but it also trains society to believe in the system. When the people see the guilty punished, they feel reassured. When they see a trial, they assume fairness has taken place. The theater becomes so convincing that even the victims sometimes believe in it. They confess, they plead, they participate in the ritual, as if acting out a play whose ending they already know. In this way, the illusion becomes self-sustaining. The rulers provide the script, and society plays its role. We must also recognize that justice theater does not only belong to authoritarian regimes. Even in modern democracies, the illusion often lingers. Trials may be televised, verdicts sensationalized, and sentences predetermined by political pressure, media narratives, or hidden influence. Wealthy individuals can afford armies of lawyers who bend the rules, while the poor are crushed under the appearance of fairness. The courtroom spectacle convinces the public that justice is blind, yet behind the scenes, outcomes are tilted by money, status, and connections. When the system claims neutrality but operates with bias, it is not true justice, it is theater. Why is this illusion so effective? Because it uses the oldest trick in power, ritual. Public trials resemble religious ceremonies. They involve robes, formal language, sacred symbols of law, and carefully orchestrated proceedings. This ritual creates awe, respect, and obedience. The people are not only watching a legal process, they are watching a symbolic act of cosmic order. The illusion transforms political repression into divine justice, corruption into fairness, vengeance into law. And once that transformation is believed, the rulers can act with impunity. The danger of justice theater is that it numbs society. If the people believe that justice has been served, they do not rise up against injustice. They accept the verdict, even when it is false. They trust the system, even when it is rigged. And in this way, injustice hides in plain sight, cloaked in the robes of fairness. The courtroom becomes a stage, the law a script, the verdict a performance, and the people the audience who never realized the play was written long before the actors took the stage. History shows us again and again that this illusion is resilient. In the French Revolution, revolutionary tribunals promised fairness but delivered guillotines to thousands after mock trials. In Nazi Germany, the People's Court under Roland Freisler turned trials into screaming performances, where guilt was certain and the theater served propaganda. And even in today's world, when politicians or celebrities are accused of crimes, the trials are often spectacles designed to maintain trust in institutions while protecting the interests of the powerful. Justice is performed, not necessarily delivered. The justice theater illusion is perhaps the most insidious of all illusions of power because it convinces people that their moral hunger has been satisfied. It feeds them the appearance of fairness while starving them of the real thing. It manipulates our desire for order, exploiting the fact that most people would rather believe the system is fair than face the terrifying possibility that it is not. And once this illusion is internalized, once people accept the play as reality, true justice becomes almost impossible to achieve. To see through the illusion requires courage. It means asking hard questions about whether verdicts are truly free, whether trials are truly impartial, whether the scales of justice are weighted in secret. It means refusing to be satisfied with theater, demanding reality instead of performance. But history warns us, rulers will always try to preserve the illusion, because without it, their legitimacy collapses. Power can survive violence, it can survive fear, but it cannot survive the revelation that its justice is a lie. And so, the stage will always be set, the actors will always play their parts, and the audience will always be invited to believe. But if we see the illusion for what it is, the curtain begins to fall, and the truth, however painful, emerges. Only then can justice be more than theater. Only then can it be real. Scarcity of truth strategy. Imagine living in a world where truth itself is rationed, where information is not a flowing river but a tightly guarded well, and only those approved by the ruler are allowed to sip from it. This is the essence of the scarcity of truth strategy. A method of control as insidious as it is effective. By making truth rare, by restricting access to honest knowledge, rulers transform it into a commodity, something so precious that its very scarcity magnifies their power. In such a system, truth is not the birthright of every citizen. It is a luxury, handed out sparingly, distorted deliberately, and always controlled by those at the top. When truth becomes scarce, confusion flourishes. People no longer know what to trust, and in that fog, authority thrives. A ruler who controls the flow of information controls the mental horizon of their subjects. They can decide what is known, what is forgotten, and what is invented. They can smother inconvenient facts until they disappear, while elevating falsehoods until they feel like eternal truths. In such a world, even the smallest revelation of fact feels like a treasure, yet it is always a treasure granted by the same hand that withholds it. By dictating scarcity, rulers create dependence. This strategy is not new. History is filled with leaders who understood that the pen could be more dangerous than the sword, and so they locked the pen away. In the Middle Ages, for centuries, the Catholic Church restricted access to Scripture. The Bible was written in Latin, a language inaccessible to most common people. Only priests and scholars could read it, and thus the Church alone controlled its interpretation. To challenge the priest was not merely to disagree, it was to risk eternal damnation. The truth existed, but it was scarce, and in that scarcity lay immense power. When Martin Luther translated the Bible into the language of the people, he wasn't just making words available. He was breaking a centuries-old monopoly on truth, shattering the foundation of control. Consider, as well, the authoritarian regimes of the 20th century. In Stalin's Soviet Union, information was tightly rationed. Newspapers, radio, books, and later television, all were instruments of the state. Facts inconvenient to the regime were not merely hidden, they were erased. Figures were airbrushed out of photographs, events rewritten in history books, names vanished from official records. Citizens lived in a reality curated by power. The truth was not absent. It was present only in whispers, in underground pamphlets, in dangerous rumors passed secretly among friends. And because truth was scarce, it was uncertain, and uncertainty kept people obedient. The scarcity of truth is not just about what is hidden, it is about what is replaced. Lies fill the void where truth has been stripped away. Repetition of propaganda becomes the substitute for evidence. When lies are repeated endlessly while truth is buried, the population begins to doubt not only what they hear, but their very ability to distinguish reality from falsehood. This erosion of confidence is the ultimate goal. A population that cannot trust its own judgment will cling desperately to the authority that promises certainty, even if that certainty is manufactured. The strategy thrives in modern times as well, though in subtler forms. Governments restrict journalists, ban books, censor the internet, or flood social media with disinformation so vast that truth drowns beneath it. The result is the same. Truth becomes rare, precious, and tightly controlled. Think about regimes today where a single newspaper, owned by the state, defines reality. Or where internet firewalls block foreign information, leaving citizens with only the official narrative. In such societies, even a small glimpse of truth from outside sources can feel revolutionary. The very scarcity of it imbues it with power, and yet, rulers are careful to punish those who spread it, ensuring the dependency remains. But the scarcity of truth strategy does not always look like open censorship. Sometimes it works through overload. By flooding society with endless conflicting narratives, rulers create such chaos that truth itself becomes indistinguishable. If every story has an alternative version, if every fact has a counterfact, people grow exhausted. They stop searching for truth altogether and instead accept whatever the authority tells them, simply because it is easier. Scarcity, in this sense, is not about absence but about clarity. Truth is drowned in noise, made rare not by lack of words but by lack of certainty. This strategy is particularly dangerous because it shapes not only knowledge but identity. What you know, what you believe, what you can say without fear, these form the boundaries of who you are. When rulers ration truth, they are rationing thought itself. A person who cannot access the truth cannot fully access freedom, because freedom without knowledge is an illusion. You cannot make meaningful choices if you are denied the facts upon which those choices depend. And so, scarcity of truth is not simply a tactic of control, it is the very foundation of tyranny. Psychologically, the scarcity of truth creates hunger. People long for authenticity, for clarity, for something they can hold on to. But in an environment where speaking the truth is punishable, or where truth itself is drowned in competing lies, that hunger becomes a vulnerability. Leaders then position themselves as the only source of nourishment. They present themselves as the guardians of reality, the interpreters of the world. Whether they drip-feed their version of truth through speeches, broadcasts, or slogans, the result is the same. The people are dependent, conditioned to look upward for answers rather than inward for understanding. Think of modern corporations as well, controlling the flow of knowledge in ways that affect billions. Social media platforms, by choosing what information to amplify and what to bury, create their own scarcity of truth. Algorithms prioritize sensation over accuracy, leaving genuine information hidden beneath mountains of distraction. Here too, truth is rationed, not by a king or dictator, but by unseen systems designed to serve profit and power. And yet the effect on the human mind is the same: confusion, dependence, and manipulation. The scarcity of truth strategy is not just about silencing voices, it is about weaponizing silence itself. It creates a void, and then fills that void with whatever narrative strengthens the ruler's grip. The danger lies not only in what is hidden, but in how quickly societies adjust to that scarcity. When people grow used to not knowing, when they accept ignorance as normal, they no longer resist it. They learn to survive by staying quiet, by believing only what is safe to believe. And in that silence, power cements itself. To resist this strategy requires relentless vigilance. It requires the courage to question, the patience to search, and the wisdom to recognize when information is being withheld or manipulated. It means understanding that truth is not only a right but a responsibility, that to surrender the search for it is to surrender freedom itself. History shows us that once truth becomes scarce, retrieving it comes at great cost, often paid in blood and sacrifice. The scarcity of truth strategy is among the most devastating tools of control because it operates invisibly. Chains are obvious, but silence is subtle. Lies are loud, but the absence of truth is quiet, creeping, and suffocating. Societies fall not only when their people are conquered, but when their people are blinded, convinced that what little light they are given is all that ever existed. And so the question becomes, will we notice when truth is being rationed around us, or will we continue drinking from the well our rulers control, mistaking their water for the whole of the river, never realizing how much has been denied us? Shadow Whisper Network. Imagine a world where the loudest orders are never spoken, where no decree needs a signature, and where fear travels faster than any police car. That world is built on whispers. The Shadow Whisper Network is not a machine you can point to. It is a mood, an atmosphere, a fog that seeps under doors and lingers in stairwells. It convinces people that resistance is dangerous not because of visible batons, but because of invisible ears. And once that belief takes root, rebellion doesn't need to be crushed, it simply never begins. At its core, a whisper network is not just about spreading information. It is about shaping expectations of risk. When people believe that informants might be anywhere, a neighbor, a coworker, the person pouring tea, every conversation becomes a calculation. A stutter replaces a shout. The question is no longer, is change possible? But, who will repeat what I say? That shift, from hope to self-censorship, is the real victory for anyone who benefits from the status quo. History offers stark illustrations. Secret police archives from 20th century regimes are filled with reports that are banal and frightening at once. Who met whom, who rolled their eyes at a speech, who bought more sugar than usual. None of these facts toppled a government. But layered together, they created an illusion of omniscience. People internalized the sense that they know everything. The number of informants mattered less than the suspicion that everyone might be one. The rumor of surveillance did more work than surveillance itself. The psychology is elegant and brutal. Humans navigate social life by reading trust signals, tone of voice, shared jokes, small confessions. A rumor that trust is unsafe hijacks that wiring. The brain, trained to avoid social pain, chooses silence before it chooses truth. Gossip becomes a security policy. In group chats, school corridors, factory floors, the same dance repeats. People test the air with a half sentence, watch eyes, then retreat. The best propaganda is not a poster, it is the hesitation inside your chest. Consider how rumors operate like slow-release chemicals. One story says a dissident was fired after a private comment. Another says a student was visited at home because of a meme. No one can verify the details. That uncertainty is the feature. Ambiguity enlarges the threat surface because the mind fills gaps with worst-case outcomes. A single unverified tale can police 1,000 conversations for months. In this way, a whisper network is not just an information channel, it is an anxiety machine. You see the same architecture in workplaces that punish the messenger. When staff suspect that feedback will be noted in a file, innovation dries up. Projects accept mediocrity because critique feels unsafe. Leaders may wonder why problems appear only when they explode. The answer is, your organization taught people that problems are safer when hidden. A culture of rumor is cheaper than a culture of force, but it kills courage just as effectively. There is also the paradox of participation. People who dislike the system may still pass along a rumor, just in case, or to signal savvy, or to protect themselves. That is how the network recruits without recruiting. It weaponizes our need to belong. If everyone repeats the same cautionary tale, then everyone says becomes a moral alibi. The result is collective responsibility without collective control, a chorus with no conductor and a melody of fear. Digital life supercharges this dynamic. Screens blur the line between hearsay and proof. A screenshot stripped of context, a voice note from a friend of a friend, a thread that begins with, "I don't know if this is true but," these are perfect delivery vehicles. Algorithms privilege engagement, anxiety engages. In hours, suspicion that a protest list was leaked or that a manager tracks private accounts can travel farther than any fact check. The damage is done long before the correction loads. And yet, the mechanics are not mystical. The shadow whisper network relies on 3 pillars: the impression of omnipresence, the risk of social isolation, and the self-amplification of uncertainty. Take any one pillar away and the structure wobbles. If people learn that not everyone is listening, courage returns. If dissenters feel linked rather than alone, they speak. If ambiguity is replaced with clear, verifiable signals, rumors starve. This is why authoritarians fear independent media, why toxic teams fear transparent processes, and why bad actors fear ordinary people comparing notes in daylight. Examples abound of communities puncturing the fog. Activists under repressive conditions have quietly arranged truth circles, where small groups verify stories before they spread. Some publish simple guides: what to document, where to store evidence, how to separate a signal from a decoy. Whistleblowers succeed not only by revealing secrets, but by making uncertainty less profitable. Even in corporate life, leaders who invite dissent publicly, who show the receipts when hard feedback is acted upon, drain the rumor economy. Courage compounds when it is seen. There is an ethical line here that matters. Studying these mechanisms should never turn into a manual for manipulation. If you are tempted to cultivate whispers to win, be it in politics, business, or school, you may succeed in the short run and inherit a wasteland in the long run. Communities governed by paranoia cannot innovate. Teams that breathe fear cannot build trust. Movements that rely on rumor eventually consume themselves. The bill always comes due. In apathy, in talent flight, in brittle institutions that shatter the first time reality shakes them. So how do ordinary people resist the gravity of the whisper? First, narrate what is happening out loud. Naming the tactic steals its glamour. When a friend says, "Careful, they're everywhere," answer, "That's the story they want us to believe, what's the evidence?" Second, model verification. Ask for sources, dates, documents. Show how to check them. Third, widen the circle of trust with deliberate care. Small, repeated acts of reliability. Trust grows the way rumors do, person to person, story to story. Fourth, diversify information diets. Seek independent outlets, talk to people who don't sound like you, prefer daylight over backchannels. Finally, invest in norms that protect dissent. In workplaces, that means anonymous channels with real follow-through. In civic life, it means supporting institutions that don't punish honest disagreement. Picture, for a moment, the emotional arc of a person inside the fog. At first, they are wary. They limit their jokes, shrink their opinions. Over time, the wariness mutates into isolation, and isolation into resignation. The final stage is not terror but indifference. Nothing matters, because nothing can be said. That is the quiet catastrophe a whisper network seeks. People who still have mouths and minds, but no longer believe speech can change anything. But indifference is reversible. The antidote is not counter-rumor, it is credible community. It is the experience of discovering that your honest sentence will not be used as a weapon against you. When enough people feel that, even for a moment, the spell breaks. Fear cannot metabolize in the presence of solidarity. The fog thins. You begin to remember what the world sounds like when people tell the truth and survive it. If there is a single lesson to carry forward, it is this. Power loves the labor it doesn't have to pay for. A shadow whisper network enlists the community to police itself. The most subversive response, then, is to refuse that unpaid labor. Decline to pass along the story that darkens the room without illuminating it. Refuse to accept mystery as proof. Reward courage quickly and publicly, and make cowardice expensive. Build rooms where laughter returns, where critique is an act of care, where people leave braver than they arrived. The end of the whisper is not silence, it is voice. Not a single shout, but 1,000 steady tones that make rumor sound small. The work is slow, imperfect, and human. It will not trend every day. But it will build the only kind of world where rebellion, when it is righteous, becomes thinkable again, not because fear has vanished, but because trust has grown bigger than the fog that once held it in place. Chain of command obscurity. Imagine a maze where every corridor looks the same, every doorway leads to another corridor, and the only sign you ever see says, policy. You follow the arrows, ask for the person in charge, and are shown another arrow. Somewhere, behind walls built of acronyms and procedures, someone is making decisions that shape your life, but the design ensures you will never meet them. That is chain of command obscurity, a system that keeps the true source of power hidden so no one can hold it to account. At first glance, it looks like efficiency. There are forms, dashboards, briefings, committees, risk councils, compliance checklists. Each is plausible. Together, they build a fog. In that fog, responsibility diffuses until it evaporates. It's not only a feature of dictatorships. Corporations, agencies, universities, even volunteer organizations slide into it when the cost of being named exceeds the cost of being wrong. Obscurity is simply cheaper than ownership. How does the fog get engineered? Start with compartmentalization. Split knowledge into pieces so no single person can see the whole picture. Add cutouts, intermediate teams or vendors whose job is implementation, with no authority to change anything. Wrap decisions in the passive voice. It has been decided, the algorithm recommends, our policy requires. Rotate chairs in committees, so signatures are always different and memory never accumulates. Place critical steps under non-disclosure, attorney, client privilege, or security reasons, creating a moat that critics cannot cross. If anyone asks for the rulebook, point them to a portal that links to another portal that links to a PDF with 200 pages of definitions and no names. A second layer is polycracy, multiple overlapping offices with fuzzy borders. In such systems, people compete for proximity to the leader rather than for clear jurisdiction. Nazi Germany famously encouraged officials to work toward the Führer, producing a tangle of authorities where directives emerged without fingerprints. In modern bureaucracies, the softer version is a portfolio of joint ownership, matrix management, and cross-functional steering groups, large enough that no single person can be isolated as the author of a harmful policy. When outcomes turn ugly, every actor can say, credibly and uselessly, I was only one voice at the table. Then comes the algorithmic veil. Decisions flow through scoring models, black box risk engines, dashboards that rank people, neighborhoods, employees. The model is presented as neutral, scientific, above politics. Yet the moment the model becomes the decision maker, It becomes the perfect shield. Who trained it? On what data? Who set the thresholds? Those choices are human, but the interface says, recommendation, and the human holding the clipboard says, my hands are tied. Even better for the obscurantist, models can be tuned off stage, nudged a few points here or there, and the public explanation never changes. Consider a few snapshots. In a hospital, an intake nurse denies a patient a scarce treatment because the triage tool assigns a low survival probability. The doctor signs the order, per protocol. The protocol committee cites national guidelines. The guideline authors cite emerging evidence from vendors who do not disclose their datasets. Who, precisely, decided that this patient would not get care? Everyone and no one. In a city housing office, eviction notices spike. Residents go to the counter and are told it's the landlord's right. Landlords say a new risk rating from a consultancy triggered automatic rent hikes. The consultancy points to market data. The agency says it relies on external assessments to avoid political interference. Round and round it goes. Families pack their lives into boxes while the chain of command dissolves into mist. Corporate history offers another mirror. Enron's creative use of special-purpose entities hid losses behind legal structures designed to fragment responsibility. Each entity had a board, a binder of compliance, and an accountant. None decided to mislead investors, yet the architecture produced that outcome. In the 2008 crisis, mortgage risks were sliced, pooled, rated, insured, and sold in ways that made it impossible to ask a simple question. Who approved the toxic loan? The answer was always a tranche, a desk, a model, a rating methodology, never a person. Obscurity distributed profit upward and blame outward. Why is this so effective? Fear controls individuals, but obscurity controls crowds. Fear is a spotlight. People can push back against a visible tyrant. Obscurity is a fog. It erases the target. Without a villain, anger has no vector. People self-censor, not because a censor knocks on their door, but because they cannot locate the door. The psychology is brutal. Learned helplessness sets in when effort fails repeatedly. Pluralistic ignorance grows when everyone assumes someone else understands the rules. The system stabilizes, not by force alone, but by confusion. How do you recognize it in the wild? Listen for 5 tells. 1. Passive voice everywhere. If you see, it is required, instead of I require, you've spotted insulation. 2. Vanishing ownership. Projects with deliverables but no named owner for outcomes, only owners for tasks. 3. Escalation paths that loop back to the same help desk with a new ticket number. 4. Metrics without margins of error, presented as absolute truth. 5. Secrecy justified by abstract categories, legal, security, brand risk, without a concrete threat model. None of these alone prove malice. Together, they signal a machine designed to survive accountability. So what breaks the spell? Sunlight is not a metaphor, it is a method. Demand names attached to thresholds. Who set the cutoff at 0.7, and when? Insist on changelogs. What moved between last quarter and this one, and why? Map the decision graph, not the org chart, but the actual sequence of approvals, data pulls, and sign-offs that lead to a real-world impact. Documentation is power when it connects cause to effect. Public records laws, freedom of information requests, discovery, audit trails, these are not bureaucratic annoyances, they are the tools that put a face on a choice. Inside organizations, build structures that fight fog by design. Replace amorphous committees with ray-psi matrices that name a single accountable owner. Tie models to a governance record that lists data sources, training dates, and responsible engineers. Require red team memos for high-stakes policies, with dissenters named and protected. Use sunset clauses so rules expire unless renewed in daylight. Publish impact assessments written in human language, not only in legalese. When leaders say, I own this, reward them. When they hide behind we, ask them to try again. There is also a cultural discipline to practice. Never accept policy as an explanation. Policy is a bridge between a value and a choice. Ask for both ends. What value does this rule protect? What choice does it make in this case? If the answer cannot be given in a sentence, either the speaker does not know, or the system prefers that you don't. In meetings, replace "we decided" with "I proposed, she objected, he approved on this date." It feels awkward at first. That awkwardness is the sound of accountability being born. None of this guarantees benevolence. Transparent power can still be cruel. But obscured power is almost guaranteed to be uncorrectable, because you cannot fix what you cannot name. That is why regimes and organizations drifting toward tyranny do not always reach for louder sirens. They reach for thicker curtains. They keep the pipeline of authority long, tangled, and dimly lit. They convince you that somewhere, someone must know what they are doing, so you stop asking who that someone is. If you've ever felt that your complaint died in transit, that your vote dissolved into a process, that your livelihood hinged on a score no one could explain, you have met the architecture I'm describing. You don't need a hero to fight it. You need a pen, a record, a question said out loud in the room. Who decided, on what evidence, and how do we change it? Ask that every time. Write the answer down. Share it. Build communities that refuse to be managed by fog. Because the opposite of tyranny is not chaos, it is responsibility illuminated. And the shortest route out of the maze is to stop following the arrows and start looking for the hand that drew them. Bread and fear principle. Imagine a principle so simple yet so brutally effective that it has been used across empires, dictatorships, prisons, and even corporations. It is the principle of bread and fear. At its core, it's about control. Give people enough to survive, to keep them dependent on you for their most essential needs, and at the same time, remind them of the consequences of stepping out of line with harsh, visible punishments. Bread to sustain, fear to subdue. It is not just a tactic. It's a formula for domination, a timeless equation that has allowed rulers and systems to maintain power long after they should have collapsed. The ancient Romans mastered this principle. The phrase bread and circuses is famous, but behind the entertaining games lay a darker truth. The Roman elite ensured the population had grain subsidies, keeping hunger at bay. Yet, any rebellion or defiance was met with crucifixions, executions in the Colosseum, or public floggings. The people knew that their survival depended on Rome's generosity, but their safety depended on obedience. The bread made them grateful, the fear kept them silent. It's easy to think of this as history, but versions of this system play out around us every day. Consider prisons. Inmates are given food, medical care, a minimal level of shelter, bread. These resources may not be luxurious, but they are controlled entirely by the system. And when someone breaks the rules, punishments are deliberately public. An inmate sent to solitary confinement, or disciplined in front of others, becomes a cautionary tale. The system doesn't just punish the rule breaker, it reminds everyone else of the cost of defiance. This combination is terrifyingly efficient. Survival requires cooperation, and defiance leads to visible suffering. Dictatorships amplify this principle to perfection. Think of North Korea. The regime controls food distribution, ensuring that the survival of millions literally depends on loyalty. Meanwhile, dissenters vanish, public executions occur, and the punishments are not hidden but staged as warnings. A citizen sees both sides, the rice handed out by the state and the execution of a neighbor. Bread and fear. Sustenance and punishment. The outcome. A population too hungry to revolt, yet too terrified to resist. What makes this principle so compelling is that it isn't only about brute force, it is psychological. Bread makes people dependent, and sometimes even grateful. Fear makes them cautious, hesitant, unwilling to question authority. Together, they create a paradox. The ruler is seen as both provider and punisher. Dependency and intimidation merge into control so deep it feels natural. People internalize it. They begin to police themselves, censoring their own behavior, avoiding any risk of punishment. This is the ultimate victory of bread and fear, when control no longer requires force because the mind has been conquered. We see traces of this principle in workplaces, too. A company provides salaries, health insurance, may be free lunches or perks. These become the bread, the sustenance that keeps employees tied to the system. But step out of line. Break a confidentiality agreement, challenge authority too loudly, or expose corruption. The punishment is termination, blacklisting, or public humiliation. And it's never done quietly. Firing someone is often visible enough to remind everyone else. Survival here depends on compliance. Fear is the unspoken contract behind the paycheck. Even in families and schools, this principle sneaks in. A child receives love, food, allowance, the bread. But when they disobey, punishments are staged so the lesson sticks. A sibling sees the punishment and learns not to repeat the same mistake. The same formula echoes, scaled down but no less effective. Bread and fear shapes behavior across every level of human life. But here's where it becomes sinister. Once you recognize this principle, you start to see how it feeds cycles of oppression. In authoritarian regimes, people do not simply stay silent because they are weak. They stay silent because the system has crafted a perfect balance. Too little bread, and rebellion brews because desperation outweighs fear. Too much bread, and people gain independence, no longer reliant on the ruler. The art lies in maintaining just enough sustenance to keep dependence alive, while always showcasing enough punishment to keep fear alive. That balance is what has allowed rulers like Stalin, Mao, and countless others to maintain control even in times of chaos. For example, Stalin's Soviet Union provided rations, jobs, and state housing, bread, but orchestrated purges, show trials, and executions, fear. Ordinary citizens watched their neighbors dragged away, often for fabricated charges. The bread was not generous, but it was survival. The fear was overwhelming, making people inform on each other just to stay safe. It wasn't just governance, it was psychological warfare. Even in modern democracies, echoes of this principle remain. Welfare systems and subsidies act as bread, but laws and visible punishments, prison sentences splashed across news headlines, remind citizens of the consequences of defiance. It doesn't mean democracies are the same as dictatorships, but the underlying mechanics of control are strikingly familiar. Power always gravitates toward this balance. Why is this so effective? Because humans are wired to avoid pain and pursue survival. Bread satisfies the primal drive for sustenance. Fear triggers the primal drive to avoid danger. Together, they bypass rational thought. A hungry man is grateful for bread even if it comes from the hand of a tyrant. A fearful man avoids rebellion even if freedom is within reach. That is why revolutions often come only when the balance breaks, when bread runs out or when fear loses its grip. Until then, bread and fear hold civilizations in check. So the next time you look at a system, whether it's a government, a corporation, or even a personal relationship, ask yourself, where is the bread and where is the fear? Because if you find both, you've uncovered the mechanism of control. It may not always look as brutal as crucifixions or gulags, but the formula is the same. Dependence created through essential resources, and obedience maintained through visible punishment. This is the bread and fear principle, ancient, enduring, and disturbingly alive. This principle is not just history. It is a mirror. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The question is, when you recognize bread and fear being used against you, will you comply, or will you resist? That choice defines not just individual freedom, but the fate of societies themselves. Selective reward amplification. Imagine a society where rewards are not distributed fairly, not based on merit, not on creativity, not on genuine contribution, but on obedience. A society where the brightest minds, the most original thinkers, and the bravest challengers are often silenced, ignored, or quietly punished, while those who fall perfectly in line with the existing power structure are celebrated, promoted, and put on pedestals. This is the principle of selective reward amplification, the deliberate act of publicly rewarding obedience while punishing disobedience quietly, creating an atmosphere where loyalty to authority becomes not only safe, but aspirational. This system works because human beings are deeply social creatures. We are influenced by what we see others receive and by how society reacts to behavior. When obedience is glorified in public, and disobedience is punished in silence, People begin to learn that compliance leads to recognition, while resistance leads to invisibility, or worse, erasure. The reward is amplified for everyone to see, becoming a glowing example, a shiny trophy, a success story played again and again in the media. The punishment, however, is hidden. Dissenters might lose opportunities, find themselves excluded from key networks, or be quietly discredited, but the process is done so subtly that others don't recognize the pattern. All they see is the obedient being lifted up, while the disobedient seem to fade away. Think of the workplace as an example. Imagine two employees, one who always agrees with management, never questions decisions, always repeats the company line. That person is promoted, given a bonus, or praised at a company-wide meeting. Another employee, equally skilled, perhaps more talented, but willing to ask difficult questions or point out uncomfortable truths, finds themselves slowly sidelined. They're not fired outright, that would be too obvious, but they're excluded from important meetings, overlooked for raises, or quietly transferred to less visible projects. Over time, the organization begins to internalize the lesson: obedience equals advancement, while disobedience equals slow exile. Governments use the same mechanism. Citizens who demonstrate loyalty, by waving flags, echoing slogans, or uncritically supporting authority, are rewarded with visibility, positions, or financial perks. Those who dare to challenge, however, are punished quietly. They may be audited, investigated, denied permits, or subtly smeared in the media. Their punishment is never framed as retaliation. It is explained away as coincidence, incompetence, or personal failure. Meanwhile, the obedient are displayed like golden idols, creating aspirational loyalty. People don't just obey out of fear. They obey because they see obedience as the path to recognition, safety, and opportunity. And here we encounter the gatekeeper of opportunity. Power does not only punish or reward, it also decides who gets access to the doors that lead upward. These gatekeepers don't need to slam doors in dissenters' faces openly. They only need to let silence do the work. The opportunities, scholarships, jobs, promotions, platforms, flow toward those who align themselves with authority. The gatekeeper doesn't have to say, "You're punished." They simply say, "We didn't see you as a good fit." The real message is understood by all. Conform, and the doors will open. Resist, and the doors will remain shut forever. This pattern becomes especially dangerous when applied to cultural or intellectual life. Artists, writers, academics, journalists, those whose job is to challenge, critique, and expand our thinking, find themselves molded by this mechanism. Those who produce work that reinforces dominant narratives are amplified, rewarded with prizes, platforms, and funding. Those who disrupt, question, or expose uncomfortable truths are quietly ignored, their work never published, their funding mysteriously drying up. Over time, society doesn't even notice the loss, because only the obedient voices are heard. The disobedient vanish into obscurity, their silence mistaken for irrelevance rather than suppression. The brilliance of selective reward amplification lies in its subtlety. Open punishment creates martyrs, and martyrs inspire resistance. But quiet punishment leaves no heroes to rally around. There are no public trials, no dramatic confrontations, just a creeping invisibility that disobedient individuals cannot easily prove. Meanwhile, the rewards are amplified, scholarships announced on stage, medals pinned to uniforms, promotions blasted across press releases. People are conditioned to aspire to obedience not just because it is safe, but because it is visibly celebrated. History shows us countless examples. In imperial courts, those who flattered rulers gained titles and estates, while those who questioned policy found themselves mysteriously exiled. In corporate empires, whistleblowers are cast into obscurity while loyal executives are glorified. In authoritarian regimes, those who echo state propaganda are given wealth, influence, and platforms, while dissidents vanish into prisons without trials. The gatekeepers of opportunity do not need to explain themselves. The system speaks through patterns of who rises and who disappears. The lesson becomes deeply ingrained in society. If you want to succeed, don't think too independently. Don't stand out for the wrong reasons. Learn the script, play the role, and one day, your obedience will be rewarded in front of the world. And because the rewards are so visible, people no longer ask what price was paid in silence. But the cost of this illusion is enormous. A society built on selective reward amplification suffocates innovation, punishes integrity, and rewards mediocrity disguised as loyalty. It conditions generations to equate conformity with success, leaving true thinkers and challengers stranded in silence. Worse, it creates a culture of aspirational obedience, where people don't just comply reluctantly, they dream of becoming the next celebrated loyalist. The real question is this: do we notice the gatekeepers? Do we see how the opportunities are distributed, how the rewards are amplified, how the punishments are hidden? Or do we sit in the audience, cheering the obedient winners, never realizing that the play we are watching is scripted, that the true actors, the bold, the disobedient, the questioners, have already been removed from the stage? Only when we begin to notice the silence, the missing voices, the vanished opportunities, can we challenge the illusion. Until then, selective reward amplification will continue shaping not just who rises, but what society itself aspires to become. Gatekeeper of opportunity. Imagine living in a society where every road to success leads through a single doorway, and that doorway is guarded not by skill, not by merit, not by chance, but by one person, the ruler. This is the essence of the gatekeeper of opportunity. It is a system where advancement, wealth, and even survival are not achieved through talent or effort, but through proximity to power. The ruler becomes the bottleneck, the funnel, the key that decides who ascends and who is left behind. And once that belief becomes widespread, people stop dreaming of independence. They dream only of access. This structure is one of the most effective ways to consolidate authority because it rewires ambition itself. Normally, human ambition is directed toward goals: building, creating, discovering, trading. But when the ruler positions themselves as the sole gatekeeper, ambition is redirected toward them. Success is no longer a function of what you do. It is a function of how close you are allowed to stand. The dream is not to invent, but to impress. Not to innovate, but to flatter. The ruler becomes not just the leader of the state, but the axis of every personal life strategy. History drips with examples. In medieval courts, nobility did not grow rich merely by tending their lands. They grew rich by catching the monarch's favor. A smile at a banquet could mean land grants. A marriage arranged by royal decree could mean power for generations. On the flip side, a single whisper of disfavor could mean ruin, regardless of ability. Centuries later, the pattern reappeared in totalitarian states. In Stalin's Soviet Union, careers in science, art, or industry did not flourish by excellence alone, but by alignment with the political vision of the leader. A wrong word in a private meeting could erase decades of progress. In these systems, the true currency was not skill, but access. The psychology of this is devastating. When a ruler is the gatekeeper of opportunity, people quickly learn to calibrate their behavior to what the ruler rewards. If loyalty is rewarded, loyalty becomes the highest virtue. If obedience is rewarded, initiative withers. If sycophancy is rewarded, truth-telling disappears. Over time, entire cultures bend toward servility, not because people are weak, but because the system punishes strength unless it is expressed in service of the gatekeeper. This is how the gatekeeper model reshapes the very DNA of ambition. It breeds a society of courtiers rather than citizens. Consider how this affects innovation. In an open society, inventors race to create something better, entrepreneurs risk to disrupt markets, artists strive to break boundaries. But under the gatekeeper system, innovation is filtered through the question, will the ruler approve? The result is stagnation masked as stability. Projects are not chosen for their merit, but for their political usefulness. Creativity bends not toward the future, but toward the throne. What could have been a culture of progress becomes a museum of loyalty tests. Even in modern organizations, you see echoes of this dynamic. When leaders position themselves as the only source of advancement, staff begin to focus less on solving problems and more on pleasing the boss. Promotions stop reflecting competence and start reflecting proximity. Whole departments turn into echo chambers. Risk-taking collapses, because risk is not judged on results but on whether the ruler liked it. It is the corporate version of the medieval court, complete with favorites, inner circles, and invisible ceilings. The power of the gatekeeper system lies not only in rewards but in the fear of exclusion. If wealth and advancement are only available through the ruler, then being cut off from their favor is worse than failure. It is annihilation. In monarchies, banishment was often worse than execution, because it meant the loss of status, income, and identity. In dictatorships, a professional falling out with the leader meant not only unemployment, but erasure from public life. Even in smaller systems, like a company, being on the wrong side of the gatekeeper can mean career stagnation for years. This fear disciplines people without a word needing to be spoken. The social consequences ripple outward. When people internalize the idea that all doors pass through one figure, they stop building independent alliances. Networks become vertical rather than horizontal. Trust between peers weakens, because everyone is ultimately competing for the same single favor. Communities fracture into individual climbers, each seeking a better position in the ruler's gaze. That is perhaps the most corrosive effect. The gatekeeper does not only control opportunity, they dissolve solidarity. No one rebels together, because everyone is calculating their personal odds of being the chosen one. And yet, the system always carries within it a hidden fragility. When opportunity depends on one person's favor, the entire society becomes dependent on that person's moods, health, and biases. If the ruler is capricious, advancement becomes random. If the ruler is absent, the system stalls. If the ruler dies, the hierarchy collapses in chaos. For all its apparent strength, the gatekeeper model concentrates risk to the point of brittleness. History shows this again and again, empires that seemed eternal unraveling overnight because the gatekeeper vanished. The antidote to this system is the dispersal of opportunity. When advancement can be earned through multiple channels, markets, merit, creativity, collaboration, the gatekeeper's throne loses gravity. People regain the sense that their future depends on their actions, not on proximity. This is why open societies flourish, not because they are chaos-free, but because they are chaos-resistant. Multiple paths to opportunity mean no single collapse can erase all hope. It is not safety in strength, it is safety in redundancy. Still, the temptation to position oneself as the sole gatekeeper is universal. Leaders know that controlling opportunity is more powerful than controlling armies. Armies may disobey, but ambition rarely sleeps. By monopolizing advancement, a ruler can bend ambition itself into obedience. That is why understanding this dynamic is essential. Not to admire it, but to recognize it when it appears, whether in a kingdom, a state, or a boardroom. In the end, the gatekeeper of opportunity does not just hoard wealth or power. They hoard dreams. They force every aspiration to pass through their hands, until people can no longer imagine wanting something without also imagining the ruler's approval. And that is the deepest theft, not of resources, but of possibility itself. To resist it is not only to demand freedom, but to reclaim the right to dream without permission. Prophecy fulfillment scheme. Imagine a ruler who doesn't just claim authority by strength, or wealth, or lineage, but by destiny itself. They don't simply say, "I am your leader." Instead, they declare, "I was foretold. My reign was written before I was born." To resist me is not rebellion against a man, but rebellion against fate. This is the essence of the prophecy fulfillment scheme, using ancient prophecies, myths, or religious texts to frame one's rule as the inevitable unfolding of destiny. It is not mere politics, it is theater on a cosmic scale, where the ruler becomes more than human. They become the fulfillment of a story people have believed for centuries. Throughout history, leaders have tapped into the deep psychological hunger for meaning that prophecies represent. Human beings long for order in chaos, for assurance that history is not random, but moving toward some destined end. Prophecy answers this hunger. When a leader ties themselves to prophecy, they step into the role of the chosen one, the Messiah, the foretold figure who turns chaos into inevitability. People do not just follow such a leader because of power. They follow because they believe resistance is futile, even sinful. Consider Alexander the Great. His mother, Olympias, encouraged the belief that Alexander was not simply the son of Philip of Macedon, but of Zeus himself. Oracles and prophecies were woven into his life story, framing his conquests as the fulfillment of divine will. As he swept through the known world, many cities opened their gates without a fight, convinced that resisting him was resisting destiny. He became not just a conqueror, but a prophecy walking, and that aura made him unstoppable, until death revealed his humanity. In imperial Rome, emperors often leaned on prophecy to justify their rise. Augustus, the first emperor, was portrayed as the fulfillment of Rome's destined greatness. Poets like Virgil wove him into the Aeneid, a mythical narrative tracing Rome's origins back to the Trojan hero Aeneas. Augustus was not just a man who seized power after civil war, he was the one fated to complete Rome's divine mission. By clothing his political victory in the robes of prophecy, he made his rule not only legitimate, but sacred. This scheme has also thrived in religious contexts. In medieval Europe, rulers sometimes framed their reigns as the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Kings styled themselves as defenders of the faith, or as new Davids, chosen by God. Joan of Arc rose from obscurity because she claimed divine visions and prophetic voices guided her mission to save France. Her very presence on the battlefield carried more weight than armies, because soldiers believed they were fighting under prophecy's banner. The brilliance of this scheme lies in its psychological trap. If people believe a prophecy has been fulfilled, every action of the ruler appears inevitable. Doubters are not just skeptics, they are blasphemers, standing against the tide of fate. And if the prophecy is vague, as most are, it can be stretched, reshaped, and retrofitted to suit the ruler's needs. An eclipse, a comet, a dream, a victory, each becomes proof that the prophecy is real. Once the idea takes hold, the ruler no longer has to prove their right to rule. Destiny has already decided. But the prophecy fulfillment scheme has its dangers. A prophecy that lifts one ruler can also lift another. Rival leaders may claim the same prophecy, sparking wars of destiny. In 17th century England, various factions saw their political struggles as part of apocalyptic fulfillment. Puritans believed they were God's chosen, while monarchists claimed divine right. The result was civil war fueled by competing visions of destiny. Prophecy, once invoked, can be a double-edged sword. Even today, the scheme survives, though often cloaked in modern language. Politicians frame themselves as the culmination of national destiny, the one chosen to restore greatness or lead a people through crisis. Cult leaders use prophecy to bind followers, declaring that their rise was foretold and that leaving them is equivalent to leaving fate itself. Media narratives often echo this, casting leaders as saviors or figures of destiny, not simply individuals with policies and flaws. What makes the prophecy fulfillment scheme so compelling is that it doesn't just command obedience, it captures imagination. People want to be part of a story larger than themselves, and prophecy offers that. To live under a foretold ruler is to believe your life participates in something eternal. Resistance feels like betrayal not only of a king, but of history itself. Yet prophecy is never truly inevitable, it is interpretation. Prophecies gain power because people choose to believe, not because the universe demands it. When belief fades, the spell breaks. Napoleon was once seen as a destined conqueror, hailed by poets as a man of fate. But after his defeat, the same voices mocked him as a pretender, a fallen actor in destiny's theater. The prophecy had not failed, rather, belief in it had evaporated. And this is the heart of the prophecy fulfillment scheme. It is not about predicting the future, but about shaping the present. By convincing people that destiny is already written, rulers lock the mind before they ever command the body. It is one of the most powerful tools of control, not by force, but by myth, by story, by the ancient hunger for prophecy that lies deep in the human soul. Personal flattery addiction. There is a sickness that spreads quietly in the halls of power, boardrooms, and even small groups. It is not hunger for money alone, nor the raw desire for control. It is something softer, subtler, and far more corrosive, the addiction to personal flattery. A leader who suffers from it surrounds themselves with people who praise them constantly, building an aura of unquestionable authority where every word sounds like prophecy, every whim looks like wisdom, and every mistake dissolves into silence. At first, it looks harmless. Who doesn't like a compliment? Encouragement can fuel courage. Positive reinforcement can push people to take risks, to strive for excellence. But when praise shifts from recognition of truth into the currency of survival, it mutates. Flattery becomes a drug, and those in command demand bigger doses. They hire advisors not for clarity but for loyalty, friends not for honesty but for applause. And slowly, reality bends. History is filled with examples of leaders who fell into this trap. Consider the courts of ancient emperors, where poets, generals, and ministers competed to exaggerate the greatness of their ruler. To question the emperor was dangerous. To flatter him was profitable. Over time, entire empires rotted because no one dared tell the truth. Military defeats were reported as victories. Famines were hidden behind staged feasts. A nation can crumble while the throne echoes with rehearsed cheers. Even in modern times, the addiction shows itself. Corporate executives are shielded by teams that say, "Brilliant idea," before the sentence is even finished. Politicians walk into rooms where every clap is orchestrated, every nod rehearsed. Online influencers build circles where criticism is banned, and only streams of admiration are allowed. In each case, the same pattern emerges: a leader convinced that their genius is unquestionable because everyone around them says so. But of course, everyone around them says so because their survival depends on it. This cycle is powerful because it feeds both sides. The flatterer gains access, protection, or reward. The addicted leader gains validation. But the cost is truth itself. Imagine a pilot flying a plane who asks the co-pilot, "Is that smoke coming from the engine?" And the co-pilot, desperate to please, replies, "No sir, the engine looks perfect, you are the best pilot alive." The plane will crash, no matter how sweet the words sound on the way down. Psychologically, flattery addiction transforms authority into a cage. The leader no longer wants to hear the truth because the truth now feels like an insult. A cautious warning feels like betrayal. A suggestion for improvement feels like disobedience. So the circle tightens. More sycophants are brought in. Those who disagree are expelled. And soon, the leader is surrounded not by advisors but by actors, rehearsing lines that keep the play going. This is not governance or leadership. It is theater, with one person as the star and everyone else as background. The aura of unquestionable authority is the final symptom. Once everyone agrees that the leader cannot be wrong, decisions stop being analyzed. They are simply accepted. Orders are followed not because they make sense, but because they came from the untouchable source. This is how catastrophes unfold. Military blunders, economic collapses, cultural failures, all driven by the refusal to question the person at the top. Not because the top is all-powerful, but because the top is wrapped in a cocoon of compliments that prevents the cold air of reality from reaching them. Think of the tragic irony here. Many leaders addicted to flattery began their journey with strength, talent, and even vision. But by silencing criticism and soaking only in praise, they lose the very sharpness that made them rise in the first place. Their instincts dull. Their strategies fail. Their charisma decays into arrogance. Surrounded by applause, they believe they are ascending, when in reality they are floating on empty words, disconnected from the ground. And for those who live under such authority, the danger is profound. People begin to censor themselves, to whisper doubts only in private, to act as if they believe what they do not. Societies fracture under the weight of dishonesty. When citizens, employees, or followers learn that truth is punished and flattery is rewarded, the incentive is clear. Everyone starts performing. Everyone starts lying. The addiction of one person becomes the corruption of an entire culture. Breaking this cycle is brutally difficult. For the leader, it requires detox, deliberately inviting critics into the room, deliberately rewarding honesty over praise, deliberately asking for dissent instead of applause. Most do not manage it, because by the time flattery has become a drug, truth feels unbearable. For the followers, it requires courage. It means risking rejection or punishment by saying what others are afraid to say. It means valuing the health of the group over the comfort of the ruler. The lesson is timeless. Authority built on truth may be challenged but will endure. Authority built on flattery cannot survive the test of reality. It creates the illusion of invincibility right up until the moment it collapses under its own lies. If you want to know whether a leader is strong, don't look at their speeches or their victories. Look at the people around them. Are they allowed to disagree? Are they allowed to criticize? Do they exist as independent minds, or are they just mirrors reflecting the same image back again and again? That answer will tell you more about the fate of the leader than any amount of cheering ever will. So remember this: the true measure of power is not how much praise you can command, but how much truth you can endure. The leader who can sit in silence and listen to criticism without rage, who can admit fault without collapsing, who can thank the voice that dares to contradict them, that leader is not addicted to flattery. That leader is still alive to reality. Everyone else is just performing in a theater built on compliments, waiting for the curtain to fall. War, glory, distraction. Picture this: a nation in crisis, its people restless, its leaders under pressure. The economy is faltering, corruption scandals are surfacing, unemployment is high, protests are brewing. The ruling elite is cornered, legitimacy slipping from their grasp. What can they do to hold power, to keep the population from turning against them? One of history's most effective strategies emerges: the principle of war, glory, distraction. Manufacture or amplify military victories, real or exaggerated, to stir patriotism, rally unity, and divert the masses from domestic failures. When people are waving flags, they are less likely to wave protest signs. This principle is as old as politics itself. Leaders have long known that nothing unites a fractured society faster than an external enemy. Domestic issues, no matter how severe, are overshadowed by the thrill of victory or the fear of defeat. Bread may keep people alive, fear may keep them obedient, but war glory turns anger into loyalty. It replaces frustration with pride, despair with hope, and rebellion with nationalism. In moments of victory, people forgive failures they would never tolerate in times of peace. Take ancient Rome. When the empire was plagued by economic troubles, political corruption, and unrest among its citizens, emperors would launch military campaigns. Victories on distant frontiers were paraded through the streets in glorious triumphs. Soldiers marched, captives were displayed, treasures were flaunted. For a time, people forgot the shortages, the high taxes, and the incompetence of their rulers. War became a theater of distraction, a dazzling performance that drowned out discontent. Fast forward to the 20th century. Argentina in 1982 provides a striking example. The military junta was losing its grip. The economy was collapsing, inflation was out of control, dissent was rising. To distract the people, the regime invaded the Falkland Islands. For a brief moment, Argentinians rallied behind their leaders. Streets filled with patriotic chants, newspapers celebrated the supposed restoration of national pride. But the war ended in defeat, and with it, the distraction collapsed. The government's failures could no longer be hidden behind the illusion of victory, and the junta fell soon after. The lesson is clear: war, glory, distraction can work, but only as long as the victories feel real and sustainable. Dictators and fragile democracies alike have played this card. Russia's actions in Crimea and later Ukraine are modern examples. When economic struggles, corruption, and political opposition threatened internal stability, the annexation of Crimea was presented as a glorious return of lost territory. Propaganda glorified the move, and approval ratings soared. The domestic problems didn't vanish, but they were masked beneath a wave of patriotic fervor. Citizens who might have protested the economy instead celebrated a military triumph. But the principle isn't limited to invasions or wars. Even symbolic military gestures can serve as distractions. Missile tests, military parades, border skirmishes, these spectacles feed the narrative of strength and national pride. They make citizens feel part of a larger story, one where their suffering at home is justified by victories abroad. It is psychological sleight of hand: redirect attention, reframe the narrative, rewrite the focus of the people. What makes war, glory, distraction so effective is that it exploits emotion at its rawest level. Patriotism is powerful. It binds individuals to a collective identity. In times of victory, people overlook their government's corruption, forgive shortages, excuse repression. They are told that sacrifices are noble, that suffering is part of a greater cause. Leaders who master this principle do not just distract, they rewire the emotional landscape of their people. But here lies the danger: when the intoxication of glory fades, the problems resurface. War can buy time, but it cannot fix a broken economy, heal corruption, or resolve inequality. That is why many leaders addicted to this principle escalate conflicts, chasing new victories to keep the illusion alive. Yet every victory raises the stakes, and every defeat risks shattering the entire facade. History is filled with rulers who clung to war glory until it consumed them. Napoleon's endless campaigns, Hitler's doomed invasions, and more recently, wars that drain economies while failing to deliver sustainable glory. Even in smaller scales, the principle thrives. Think of leaders who face scandals or failures and suddenly emphasize terrorism, border security, or foreign threats. Military raids are televised, speeches celebrate the bravery of troops, flags flood the media. The goal is always the same: shift focus. Instead of asking why hospitals are underfunded or why corruption thrives, people are encouraged to cheer for tanks rolling across deserts or planes flying overhead. War glory doesn't always mean a full-scale war, it means manufacturing pride to overshadow pain. So, whenever you see headlines celebrating military strength during times of domestic crisis, ask yourself, is this truly about defense, or is it about distraction? Is the victory on the battlefield, or is the real victory in diverting your attention? The war glory distraction principle reminds us that power is not only maintained by force or fear, but also by spectacle. The drums of war are not just about enemies abroad, they are about silence at home. And history teaches us that as long as people cheer louder for battles than they protest for justice, rulers will continue to wield war not as defense, but as distraction. False unity pageantry. Imagine a city lit up with banners, fireworks exploding across the night sky, flags waving in unison, music swelling as crowds gather to cheer. On the surface, it feels like unity. It feels like a country standing together, proud, unbreakable, harmonious. But beneath the surface, a darker reality festers: economic struggles, political corruption, civil unrest, voices of dissent growing louder. This is the strategy of false unity pageantry, the deliberate staging of national celebrations, parades, anniversaries, and spectacles to distract the public from deep fractures, to conceal unrest, and to project an image of strength and cohesion that does not truly exist. False unity pageantry works by manipulating perception. Human beings are drawn to rituals, to symbols, to collective displays of emotion. When we march together, sing together, and celebrate together, we feel bonded. Leaders know this, and they weaponize it. Instead of confronting the internal chaos, whether it is poverty, inequality, protests, or government failures, they create grand spectacles to smother those realities under a flood of patriotic performance. The illusion is simple: if the nation can still celebrate together, surely the nation is united. History offers chilling examples. In the Soviet Union, massive May Day parades filled Red Square with marching soldiers, gleaming tanks, and smiling citizens waving flags. But those parades often coincided with periods of intense repression, food shortages, and public dissatisfaction. The pageantry was not about unity, it was about silencing cracks in the system by overwhelming the people with spectacle. Similarly, in Nazi Germany, the Nuremberg rallies were engineered to create an aura of total unity and strength. Thousands of carefully choreographed soldiers, banners stretching into the horizon, crowds roaring in unison. But behind the spectacle lay fear, censorship, and brutal repression of any dissent. Even in modern democracies, the pattern continues. Consider the way national holidays or military parades are sometimes amplified during moments of crisis. Economic downturn? Distract with a grand Independence Day spectacle. Political scandal. Rally the people under patriotic symbols. Widespread protests. Flood the media with coverage of parades, concerts, or celebrations of national pride. These events do not resolve the underlying unrest, they cover it temporarily with a shiny surface. One of the keys to this illusion is selective visibility. The cameras never show the protests happening blocks away from the parade. They never broadcast the voices of dissent drowned out by the music. Instead, the media becomes a partner in the illusion, magnifying the spectacle, repeating the slogans, cutting away from any glimpse of unrest. Citizens watching from home are told, implicitly, "Look how united we are. Look how strong we stand together." Those who feel otherwise begin to doubt themselves, questioning if their dissatisfaction is isolated, if maybe they are alone in their struggle. False unity pageantry also exploits the psychology of belonging. People want to feel part of something larger. When everyone around them is celebrating, waving flags, and chanting in unison, it becomes socially dangerous to resist. Refusing to participate marks one as disloyal, even unpatriotic. And so, many people join the performance not out of genuine belief, but out of fear of isolation. In this way, the pageantry silences dissent not only by distraction, but by social pressure. Think of a nation facing massive unemployment. Protests fill the streets, demanding reforms. Instead of addressing the economic crisis, the government declares a National Unity Day, filled with parades, concerts, and fireworks. The media focuses on the joy of the celebrations, showing smiling children and waving flags. The protest footage is minimized, buried, or dismissed as fringe. The illusion spreads, the country is united, only a small minority is dissatisfied. The unrest has not disappeared, but the pageantry has created a counter-image powerful enough to overshadow it. Corporations sometimes use a similar tactic. When a company faces backlash over exploitation, it launches grand celebrations of its values, showcasing employee appreciation days, charity events, or flashy PR campaigns. The goal is not to fix the problem, but to bury it under spectacle. The same principle applies. Amplify unity in public, ignore unrest in private. The danger of false unity pageantry is that it numbs the population. People begin to believe the surface image more than the underlying reality. They see the banners, the fireworks, the parades, and think, if this were truly a broken nation, would we celebrate like this? The performance becomes proof of stability, even when everything beneath it is crumbling. In this way, pageantry buys time for those in power. It doesn't heal the wound, it covers it with glitter. But illusions are fragile. History shows that when the gap between spectacle and reality grows too wide, the truth bursts through. The Soviet parades could not stop the collapse of the USSR. The Nazi rallies could not mask the devastation of war. Modern spectacles cannot forever silence economic despair or political corruption. Eventually, the people notice that the fireworks fade, the banners are taken down, and their lives remain the same. False unity pageantry is a reminder that unity cannot be manufactured with flags and parades. Real unity is built through justice, fairness, and shared prosperity. When leaders rely on spectacle to hide unrest, they are admitting weakness, not demonstrating strength. The question for any society is, do we recognize when unity is genuine, and when it is simply staged? Do we look beyond the parades and see the unrest still burning beneath? Because if we do not, we risk mistaking noise for stability, pageantry for peace, and illusion for truth. And in that blindness, we give power to those who would rather decorate the cracks in the foundation than repair them. Manufactured external threat. Picture a ruler standing before a crowd, their voice firm, their gaze sweeping across the sea of faces. Behind them, banners ripple, soldiers stand alert, and the message is unmistakable: the enemy is at the gates. Sometimes that enemy is real, but more often than we care to admit, it is manufactured. A shadow enlarged by torchlight, a threat exaggerated, invented, or distorted until it feels too dangerous to ignore. This is the tactic of the manufactured external threat, one of the oldest and most powerful tools of control. By convincing people that survival depends on unity against a hostile outsider, rulers tighten their grip without ever having to ask permission. The brilliance of this tactic lies in its simplicity. Fear binds faster than hope. When people are convinced that their way of life is under attack, they rally around whoever promises protection. Suddenly, questioning authority feels like betrayal. Dissent becomes dangerous, not because the ruler said so, but because the community has absorbed the idea that disagreement weakens the collective defense. The ruler does not need to crush rebellion directly. They only need to declare that rebellion serves the enemy. And with that, internal critics are not just opponents, they are traitors. History is littered with examples. In ancient empires, barbarian invasions were often exaggerated to justify new taxes or extended military service. The people accepted hardship not because they loved their rulers, but because they feared what lay beyond the borders. In 20th century regimes, this tactic became an art form. The Cold War was filled with leaders on both sides amplifying the threat of annihilation to justify surveillance, purges, and censorship. Propaganda posters screamed of spies, infiltrators, and saboteurs, creating a world where the line between foreign and domestic enemies blurred until everyone was suspect. The constant drumbeat of fear did not just prepare people for war, it prepared them to accept control. The psychological effect is profound. Humans are wired to form tribes, to distinguish us from them. When an external threat is presented, especially one described as cunning, hidden, or ruthless, the brain shifts into survival mode. Nuance disappears. Complexity vanishes. The only categories that matter are loyalist and traitor, defender and infiltrator. This shift allows rulers to simplify their own image. They no longer need to be wise, fair, or even competent, they only need to be the shield. In times of fear, a flawed protector is still preferable to no protector at all. Rumors of foreign plots serve this tactic perfectly. A whisper that a neighboring country funds unrest. A newspaper headline about spies caught near a border. A government broadcast warning of invisible networks of enemies. None of these claims need to be entirely true. They only need to be plausible enough to stoke the imagination. And the imagination does the rest, filling gaps with worst-case scenarios. This is the same psychology that drives conspiracy theories. When fear is seeded, the human mind connects dots, even where no lines exist. The manufactured external threat is not confined to nations. Corporations use it when they portray competitors as existential dangers rather than market rivals. Religious sects use it when they insist that outsiders are agents of corruption who seek to destroy the faith from within. Even schools and small communities fall prey to it, where leaders exaggerate the hostility of outsiders to keep members obedient. The tactic scales down as easily as it scales up, because the core mechanism, fear of the other, is universal. And yet, the tactic carries a hidden cost. A society that constantly believes it is under siege cannot innovate freely. Fear narrows vision. It focuses energy on survival, not growth. Scientific inquiry slows because new ideas feel dangerous. Artistic expression shrinks because creativity looks like disloyalty. The society survives, but it does not flourish. It becomes brittle, locked in a permanent defensive crouch. Ironically, by obsessing over external enemies, such societies often neglect internal decay, the rot that eventually collapses them from within. There is also the paradox of control. The more a ruler depends on external threats to maintain unity, the more they need those threats to endure. Peace becomes dangerous because peace raises questions. Why are we still censored, still surveilled, still restricted if the danger is gone? For the gatekeeper of fear, stability is a liability. That is why some regimes provoke small conflicts or inflate minor incidents, not to win wars but to keep the illusion of danger alive. War becomes less about victory and more about narrative fuel. The enemy does not need to be defeated, they need to be permanent. Modern technology magnifies this tool. With social media, the speed at which fear can be manufactured is unprecedented. A single image, doctored or decontextualized, can spread to millions in minutes. A speech about invisible foreign agitators can echo globally within hours. Algorithms, designed to privilege engagement, reward fear-driven content because it triggers stronger reactions than calm analysis. The manufactured threat now travels faster than ever, and it wears the mask of authenticity because it comes from multiple directions at once. The ruler's voice is amplified not only by state propaganda, but by the citizens themselves, who repeat and share fear as if it were truth. The antidote is not simple. Telling people, "Don't be afraid," rarely works, because fear is a primal response. What does work is transparency and verification. When citizens learn to demand evidence, to check sources, to compare narratives across multiple channels, the fog thins. When institutions publish data openly and invite scrutiny, the manufactured threat loses potency. Communities that foster critical thinking and encourage cross-border dialogue make it harder for fear to be monopolized. The moment people see that outsiders are not demons, but humans much like themselves, the grip of fear weakens. And yet, the most powerful antidote is solidarity. Manufactured threats thrive when people feel isolated and dependent on the ruler for safety. But when communities build horizontal trust, when neighbors, colleagues, and peers verify truth for each other, the ruler's monopoly on fear breaks. Suddenly, protection is not something granted from above, but something built from below. That shift is subtle, but it is enough to unravel the entire strategy. In the end, the tactic of the manufactured external threat is a story, repeated until it feels like reality. A story of enemies at the gate, of betrayal lurking in shadows, of salvation only through obedience. It is a story that trades imagination for chains. But like all stories, it requires an audience willing to listen. The moment people stop reacting with reflexive fear and start asking difficult questions, the story begins to crack. And when the story cracks, the ruler's grip slips. Fear no longer binds. Authority no longer feels inevitable. And the people, for the first time, glimpse the possibility that safety and freedom do not have to be opposites. They can exist together, once the manufactured enemy is seen for what it truly is, a shadow on the wall, enlarged by design, and powerless once the torch is turned away. Loyalty purge cycle. Imagine a ruler who seems surrounded by loyal advisors, ministers, and generals, but none of them can ever truly feel safe. They may be praised one day, and the next day, accused of treason, stripped of titles, or even executed. This is not madness. It is design. It is the loyalty purge cycle, a deliberate strategy where rulers periodically remove, exile, or destroy even their most trusted followers to ensure no one outside themselves can ever accumulate lasting power. In this cycle, loyalty is never enough, because loyalty is temporary, but ambition is eternal. The ruler understands this, and so they create an environment where fear, not trust, is the glue that binds the court together. This scheme is as old as power itself. The logic is brutally simple. Advisors and generals, if left unchecked, grow strong. They gather networks of followers, wealth, influence. In time, they become more than servants, they become rivals. A wise ruler, one who seeks to remain unchallenged, does not wait for this rivalry to mature. They strike first, preemptively cutting down even the loyal, to remind everyone that power can never be shared, only borrowed, and always at the ruler's mercy. One of the clearest examples comes from ancient China, under the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. He unified the warring states, but once in power, he lived in constant fear of plots and betrayal. Ministers who had helped him rise were removed or executed once their usefulness waned. Generals who had won him victories were sidelined or quietly destroyed. By cycling through his officials, he prevented anyone from creating a permanent power base. His dynasty collapsed quickly after his death, but during his reign, no one dared to challenge him directly, because none were allowed to become strong enough. In Rome, emperors followed the same pattern. The Emperor Tiberius, suspicious by nature, purged countless senators and advisors. Later emperors like Caligula and Nero would reward and then suddenly slaughter their inner circles. It was a cycle. Bring people close, elevate them, make them dependent, and then remove them before they became indispensable. For the court, this bred paranoia. Every ally was a potential rival, every triumph a possible death sentence. And for the emperor, that paranoia was the point. The loyalty purge cycle reached terrifying heights under Joseph Stalin. In the 1930s, Stalin orchestrated the Great Purge, where not just enemies but loyal allies were targeted. Men who had fought beside him in the revolution, who had helped him rise to power, were accused of fabricated crimes and executed or sent to labor camps. Why? Because their loyalty was irrelevant. What mattered was that their influence, their networks, and their reputations could, one day, pose a threat. By regularly purging his own supporters, Stalin ensured that no one could ever feel secure enough to challenge him. The loyalty of today did not protect you from the purge of tomorrow. But the cycle is not only about killing or exiling. Sometimes it is subtler. A ruler may rotate ministers constantly, so no one holds an office long enough to entrench themselves. They may pit advisors against each other, ensuring no unity exists outside the throne. They may deliberately humiliate or demote the powerful, reminding them that their status is not theirs by right but by favor. This creates a culture where the only consistent power is the ruler's own. Everyone else lives in a cycle of rise and fall, knowing that their turn will come eventually. Why does this work? Fear keeps people obedient. If no one can be sure of tomorrow, they spend their energy surviving rather than plotting. They cling to the ruler, even as they fear them, because only proximity to the throne offers temporary safety. The purge cycle also resets the hierarchy regularly. By cutting down the strong, the ruler makes room for the weak, who are grateful for promotion and thus temporarily loyal, until, of course, they too must be purged. But the loyalty purge cycle is dangerous. It creates instability, draining the state of talent and trust. Armies lose skilled generals, governments lose competent ministers, economies lose experienced administrators. Over time, the court fills with sycophants too afraid to act, too weak to lead, and too cautious to innovate. The ruler may remain unchallenged, but the empire itself begins to rot. This is the paradox. The cycle protects the throne in the short term, but it often dooms the dynasty in the long term. Yet rulers keep using it, because for them, survival outweighs legacy. A ruler thinking of today cannot risk allowing a powerful minister to dream of tomorrow. Better to be feared in life than remembered fondly in history. The cycle is brutal, but it is rational, if your only goal is to stay on top. Even in modern organizations, echoes of this cycle exist. Leaders sometimes remove rising stars, not because they are disloyal, but because their competence threatens the leader's dominance. CEOs may cycle through executives, politicians through advisors, generals through commanders. Each purge sends the same message: loyalty is never enough, because power itself is the crime. The loyalty purge cycle is not just about eliminating rivals. It is about teaching everyone a lesson, that no bond, no friendship, no achievement can outweigh the ruler's suspicion. In such a world, survival depends not on being loyal, but on being invisible, cautious, and ready to bow when the axe swings. And in this world, the ruler remains supreme, not because they are loved, not because they are trusted, but because everyone else lives in fear of the cycle repeating, again and again. Tax-benefit illusion. There is a trick as old as civilization, a trick that turns obligation into gratitude and theft into generosity. It is called the tax-benefit illusion. The scheme is simple: take much, give back little, and convince people to thank you for it. Heavy taxes are imposed, wealth is drained from the hands of ordinary citizens, and then a fraction of that same wealth is returned as subsidies, programs, or gifts that are advertised as blessings from the state. It is the illusion of generosity, a performance designed to make the giver look like a savior, when in truth they are simply returning to you what they already took. Consider the psychology of it. If someone steals $10 from your wallet and then gives you back $2 with a smile, you would call them a thief, not a benefactor. But when a government, or any authority with taxing power, does the same on a larger scale, it often escapes notice. Why? Because the machinery of taxation and redistribution is hidden behind complexity, paperwork, and ceremony. The taking feels distant, automated, spread out over payroll deductions and hidden levies. The giving feels immediate, personal, often wrapped in speeches and ceremonies. People cheer as if they are receiving a gift, forgetting that the true gift would have been the freedom to keep what was theirs in the first place. History is littered with examples of this illusion at work. Ancient rulers extracted wealth through tributes and tithes, then staged massive public feasts, circuses, and monuments. The people, starved by taxation, were grateful for the bread and the games provided by the same hand that had emptied their cupboards. The Roman poet Juvenal captured this perfectly when he wrote of bread and circuses, the strategy of distracting the population with handouts while the empire drained their labor for its wars and luxuries. The people thanked their emperors for what was, in fact, their own money repackaged. In modern systems, the illusion takes more subtle forms. Citizens work, and from every paycheck taxes are quietly deducted. Sales taxes, fuel taxes, property taxes, fees, licenses. The drain is constant, yet it blends into the background. Then, once in a while, a politician announces a new benefit, a relief check, a tax credit, a subsidy for education, a program for housing. Crowds applaud, newspapers celebrate, speeches glorify the compassion of leaders. But in reality, the majority of that benefit is a sliver of what was already collected. The difference is swallowed by bureaucracy, interest payments, and administrative machinery that exists primarily to sustain itself. The citizen receives a fragment of their own contribution and is told to bow in gratitude. The illusion is powerful because it is wrapped in emotion. A family receives a subsidy to help with heating costs in winter, and they are thankful, forgetting that their fuel is expensive largely because of layered taxes and regulations that inflated the price in the first place. A worker gets a rebate check and feels relief, not pausing to calculate how much more they paid throughout the year compared to what they are receiving back. This is not generosity, it is redistribution with a marketing strategy. And the marketing works best when the numbers remain abstract, when no one adds up the totals. There is also a deeper danger here. The tax benefit illusion creates dependency. When people see benefits as gifts rather than partial refunds of their own money, they begin to view authority not as accountable to them, but as the provider of their livelihood. Gratitude replaces scrutiny. People hesitate to question policies because they fear losing the benefits. They forget that they are not recipients of generosity but rightful owners of the wealth that was taken. This inversion of perception is how control is maintained. Instead of demanding efficiency or accountability, citizens are trapped in cycles of applause and dependence. Corporate versions of this illusion exist as well. Employers who underpay workers but then provide flashy perks, like free pizza days or branded merchandise, use the same psychological sleight of hand. The real value taken is hidden, the small benefit given is showcased. Employees cheer the perks while their wages stagnate. It is the same pattern scaled down, but the same manipulation at its core. The most insidious part of the illusion is its normalization. Generations grow up believing that this cycle is natural. They are taught to equate taxation with generosity, to celebrate refunds as if they were gifts, to cheer benefits as if they came from outside rather than from within. The illusion becomes culture, and culture becomes cage. Once normalized, questioning it feels almost ungrateful, almost rebellious. People who point out the imbalance are accused of selfishness, as though refusing to bow to the illusion is an act of betrayal. And yet, breaking the spell is possible. It begins with awareness, seeing clearly the exchange at work. To measure what is taken versus what is given. To compare the total cost of taxation with the value of the benefits returned. When that calculation is made honestly, the illusion begins to crumble. The so-called gifts shrink into perspective, and the generosity reveals itself as recycling. This clarity is dangerous to those who depend on the illusion, which is why transparency is resisted, numbers are buried, and complexity is weaponized. The truth is simple. Real generosity comes from voluntary giving, not forced extraction. Real gifts are not taken from your own pocket and handed back with a ribbon. The tax benefit illusion survives only as long as people forget the sequence. First the taking, then the giving. To reverse that order in the public mind is the magician's trick. And like all illusions, it collapses the moment the audience pays attention. So the next time you see a leader announce a grand benefit, ask the forbidden question. How much did they take to create this gift? How many layers of cost consumed the difference? And what would life look like if the wealth had never been siphoned away to begin with? That question is not cynical. It is clarity. And clarity is the one thing illusion fears the most. Cosmic alignment claim. Imagine a leader not just standing on a stage, not just wielding the sword or the law, but claiming alignment with the cosmos itself. A leader who insists their authority is not simply political, not merely military, but cosmic, ordained by the stars, written in the heavens, chosen by the universe. This is the principle of the cosmic alignment claim, one of the most powerful and mystical tools in the long history of power. Because when rulers tie themselves to celestial events, they move beyond human legitimacy into the realm of the divine. Questioning them becomes not just rebellion against a king or emperor, it becomes rebellion against the very order of the universe. Throughout history, societies have looked upward to the skies for meaning. The sun, the moon, the stars, the strange dances of comets and eclipses, these were never seen as random. They were interpreted as messages, omens, signs of destiny. Leaders understood this and seized upon it. By claiming alignment with celestial phenomena, they bound their reigns to cosmic inevitability. They became more than men, they became living embodiments of fate. Take ancient Egypt. Pharaohs were not merely kings, they were considered divine beings, children of the sun god Ra. Their coronations and rituals were timed with celestial events, the rising of Sirius, the flooding of the Nile, events that symbolized renewal and eternal order. By anchoring their power in the stars, they made their leadership unquestionable. To oppose a pharaoh was not just political treason, it was a violation of cosmic balance itself. In China, the mandate of heaven worked in a similar way. Dynasties rose and fell based on perceived cosmic approval. Solar eclipses, strange comets, or natural disasters were interpreted as signs that heaven had withdrawn its mandate. But when the skies were clear, when celestial events coincided with a new ruler's rise, it was framed as proof that they were chosen. The cosmic alignment claim gave rulers both divine authority and a cosmic narrative to explain their reign. Even in medieval Europe, kings and emperors tied their fates to the heavens. Astrology was not a fringe belief, it was mainstream. Monarchs consulted astrologers before battles, before coronations, before marriages. Queen Elizabeth I was famously guided by the astrologer John Dee, who tied her reign to celestial calculations. When her rule coincided with comets or eclipses, it was spun as cosmic confirmation that she was England's destined ruler. The message was clear, the stars themselves supported her sovereignty. But the cosmic alignment claim goes beyond ancient times. Even in modern politics, echoes of it remain. Leaders still invoke destiny, providence, and cosmic timing. Some frame their elections as meant to be, aligning themselves with national holidays, celestial phenomena, or historical anniversaries that give their rise a sense of inevitability. Think of speeches where leaders say things like, "It was written," or "The stars have aligned for our nation." These aren't random words, they are subtle attempts to link their authority with something larger than politics, something cosmic. What makes this principle so powerful is its psychological grip. People fear chaos. They crave meaning in randomness. When the world feels uncertain, when society trembles, the claim that a leader is aligned with the heavens provides comfort. It suggests order, destiny, purpose. It makes citizens feel that they are part of something eternal, written in the stars. And so, even those who might doubt the leader's politics can be swayed by the aura of cosmic inevitability. But like all tools of power, it can be abused. History shows us rulers who manipulated celestial events for control. Consider the story of Christopher Columbus. During his time in the Caribbean, he exploited a lunar eclipse. When tensions rose with the local people, Columbus claimed that his god would darken the moon as punishment for their disobedience. When the eclipse appeared exactly as he predicted, the locals were terrified and submitted to him. This was not astronomy for knowledge. It was astronomy as power. A cosmic alignment claim weaponized. Even dictators in the modern era have leaned into this principle, not with literal stars but with cosmic language. They frame themselves as the chosen one, the destiny of the nation, the sun around which all must orbit. The imagery may be less astronomical, but the core idea is the same. Their rule is not ordinary, it is cosmic, beyond the reach of mortal questioning. The danger is obvious. When leaders claim cosmic alignment, they remove themselves from accountability. If their rule is ordained by the heavens, then no earthly criticism matters. Dissent becomes sacrilege. Opposition becomes meaningless. After all, how can you fight the stars? This creates an aura of inevitability that crushes resistance before it even begins. Yet, this principle has a fatal flaw. Cosmic claims can collapse as quickly as they rise. When celestial events fail to match the narrative, when famine or disaster contradicts the supposed cosmic blessing, belief shatters. Entire dynasties have fallen when the heavens were no longer seen as aligned with them. What once gave infinite power can just as quickly strip it away. The higher the claim, the harder the fall. So why does this matter now? Because humans still look upward, still search for meaning beyond themselves. We may not live in empires of pyramids or dynasties ruled by comets, but the hunger for cosmic legitimacy is timeless. Leaders who cloak themselves in destiny and cosmic alignment are still among us. They may not control the stars, but they control narratives, and in the end, that may be just as powerful. The cosmic alignment claim is one of the oldest and most dangerous principles of power. It seduces by suggesting that leadership is not chosen, but destined. It makes rulers untouchable, beyond the reach of earthly judgment. And it reminds us of a hard truth. As long as people believe the universe itself has chosen their leader, they will follow, even into ruin. Hero replacement ritual. Picture a society that has lost a true hero. Someone who embodied courage, authenticity, sacrifice, or truth. Someone the people trusted because they stood for values larger than themselves. The grief is real, the admiration runs deep, and the public searches for a figure to carry that torch forward. But instead of allowing that admiration to grow freely, those in power step in. They carefully stage a replacement. They take the image of a hero and swap it with a figurehead, someone loyal, controllable, and safe for the system. This is the hero replacement ritual, a deliberate strategy to control public admiration by substituting authentic heroes with manufactured ones. The ritual begins with the loss or removal of a genuine hero. Sometimes the hero dies unexpectedly. Sometimes they are assassinated, discredited, or sidelined. But in every case, a vacuum of admiration emerges. The people long for someone to admire, someone to represent their ideals. Power structures understand this longing, and they know it is dangerous. A society inspired by uncontrolled heroes can become unpredictable, rebellious, or ungovernable. So, instead of letting natural admiration flow, they manufacture a replacement. One who looks heroic, but who is deeply tied to the system. History offers stark examples. After revolutionary leaders fall, successor figures are often installed who carry the image of heroism but none of its independence. In ancient Rome, generals who threatened the Senate's control were demonized or killed, only to have statues erected later of more obedient figures celebrated as defenders of Rome. In the Soviet Union, when authentic revolutionaries who spoke against corruption were eliminated, they were replaced in textbooks and propaganda by state-approved heroes, workers, soldiers, and leaders chosen precisely because they were loyal to the party. The ritual wasn't just about honoring someone new, it was about controlling who the people were allowed to admire. The mechanics are subtle but powerful. First comes the amplification of the new figurehead. The media floods stories of their bravery, their loyalty, their speeches, their carefully staged photographs. School children are taught to look up to them, songs are written in their honor, ceremonies are organized to celebrate their deeds. Simultaneously, the memory of the fallen hero is managed, sometimes glorified in vague, harmless terms, other times quietly erased or overshadowed. The replacement hero does not need to match the authenticity of the original. They only need to absorb the public's admiration and redirect it safely toward the system. Modern societies still practice this ritual, though in more polished forms. Consider celebrity culture. When a cultural figure rises who speaks uncomfortable truths, criticizing exploitation, war, or inequality, they often find themselves sidelined. In their place, new celebrities are elevated, individuals with polished images, who speak in vague inspirational slogans but never challenge the system directly. The public, hungry for heroes, transfers their admiration, often without realizing the substitution. The ritual is complete, genuine courage replaced by safe inspiration. Think, too, of politics. When a leader with real charisma and independent vision dies or is forced out, the establishment often rushes to install a successor with the same outward qualities, youthful energy, stirring speeches, symbolic gestures, but who privately follows orders. They are paraded as the natural heir, the one who will carry the torch. And the public, craving continuity, accepts the substitution, not realizing that what has been carried forward is not the spirit of the hero, but the control of the system. The hero replacement ritual is most dangerous because it manipulates one of the deepest human needs, the need for role models. Heroes shape culture. They give us something to strive toward, something to believe in. By controlling who we admire, power controls what we aspire to become. If the only heroes we see are safe, obedient figureheads, then obedience itself becomes the standard of greatness. True heroism, bravery, defiance, integrity, fades from public imagination. Consider how young generations are shaped by this. If textbooks, movies, and speeches constantly celebrate figures who never question authority, but punish or erase those who do, children grow up aspiring not to courage, but to loyalty. The ritual doesn't just replace heroes, it reshapes entire cultures, teaching people that greatness lies in obedience rather than authenticity. But like all illusions, cracks appear. People notice when replacements lack the spark of the original. They feel the emptiness, the difference between a hero who truly sacrificed and a figurehead who simply performs. Sometimes, underground stories of the fallen hero survive, whispered in communities, carried in secret songs, shared in private conversations. These stories resist the ritual, keeping the memory of true heroism alive. And when enough people remember, the figurehead collapses, exposed as an empty symbol. The hero replacement ritual reminds us of a fundamental truth: admiration is power. Who we admire determines what we value, and what we value shapes the future. If we allow our admiration to be manipulated, we become complicit in illusions. But if we hold tightly to the memory of true heroes, those who acted with integrity even at great cost, we resist the substitution. The question is whether we can tell the difference. Can we look past the polished images, the grand ceremonies, the endless repetition of a new hero, and ask ourselves, does this person embody sacrifice, authenticity, and truth, or are they simply the chosen figurehead of the system? Because only when we learn to distinguish between authentic heroes and manufactured ones can we break free from the ritual that has controlled public admiration for centuries. Selective law enforcement. Imagine living under laws that are written in stone but enforced in sand. Rules are everywhere, rules that touch every corner of daily life, from what you say to what you sell to how you gather with others. And yet, these rules are not applied equally. Some violations are punished swiftly and brutally, while others are ignored entirely, depending on who commits them and what mood the ruler is in. This is not chaos. This is selective law enforcement, a strategy not to uphold justice, but to cultivate uncertainty, to remind people that the line between safety and punishment is never clear, and that the only way to survive is to stay submissive, compliant, and afraid. The power of selective enforcement lies in its unpredictability. If every violation were punished equally, people would know the boundaries. They could make calculations, they could resist strategically, they could even build solidarity around shared consequences. But when the system punishes some and spares others arbitrarily, the calculation becomes impossible. One person speaks out and is destroyed, another says the same thing and nothing happens. A businessman cuts corners and prospers, his competitor cuts the same corners and is imprisoned. The result is not only fear, but paranoia. People begin to internalize the belief that the true rule is not written in any book. It is written in the ruler's mood, in the shifting winds of favor, in the opaque judgment that no one can predict. History gives us countless examples. In the Soviet Union, black markets thrived in the shadows of official policy. Technically, buying and selling goods privately was illegal. And yet, everyone did it. Sometimes it was ignored, because even officials needed the goods. Other times, a crackdown would come out of nowhere, with people hauled off as criminals for acts their neighbors performed daily. The point was not to eliminate the black market, it was to keep everyone vulnerable, to remind them that the state's mercy, not the written law, was what kept them free. In authoritarian regimes across the globe, laws against speech, assembly, or minor economic violations serve the same function. The letter of the law is always hanging above, like a sword, but it only falls when the ruler wants to make an example. This strategy works because it corrodes the very idea of fairness. Fair enforcement creates trust, even if the rules are harsh. Selective enforcement destroys trust, not only in the state but in one another. When people see that laws are applied unevenly, they begin to suspect each other. Who was spared, and why? Who is secretly favored? Who has protection from above? Suspicion spreads like a toxin, fragmenting communities, preventing unity, ensuring that people are too busy distrusting their neighbors to ever challenge the system. The psychological burden is immense. Imagine constantly monitoring yourself, not because you know what will get you punished, but because you don't know. Every choice feels risky. People become hyper-cautious, avoiding any behavior that might draw attention, even if it's technically legal. In time, self-censorship becomes instinct. The fear of invisible boundaries is stronger than the fear of known ones. This is how selective law enforcement turns the population into its own jailer. You don't need a guard on every corner when people are already guarding themselves. And the arbitrariness has another, more sinister effect. It makes the rulers favor the only true shield. If laws are unpredictable, then the only safe path is to seek patronage, to curry favor, to align yourself with those who have immunity. Corruption flourishes, because bribes and connections become the only reliable way to ensure protection. In such a system, power flows not from the rule of law but from the rule of loyalty. Obedience is rewarded with invisibility. Dissent is punished with sudden exposure. The law becomes less of a code and more of a weapon, wielded selectively to maintain control. We can see echoes of this in workplaces too. A company may have policies against harassment, theft, or unethical behavior. But if enforcement depends on who is involved, the message is clear: rules are flexible, power is not. An employee who criticizes the leadership may find themselves disciplined for a minor infraction, while a favored employee can violate policies without consequence. The result is the same as in authoritarian states: confusion, distrust, and an environment where survival depends not on competence, but on obedience. The cruelty of selective enforcement is that it teaches people not to trust justice itself. The very system that claims to uphold fairness is revealed as a tool of manipulation. People stop believing in reform, stop believing in equality under the law, because the law itself has become a trap. And once that cynicism takes root, it is very difficult to uproot. Even when such regimes collapse, the culture of distrust often lingers for generations. People hesitate to believe that rules can ever be neutral again. The genius of the tactic lies in its invisibility. Outsiders looking in may see laws on the books and assume order. But inside, people know that order is an illusion, that safety is temporary, that the ground beneath their feet can give way without warning. The ruler can always point to the law and claim legitimacy. After all, the person punished technically broke the rules. What the ruler never admits is that everyone breaks the rules, every day, because the system is designed that way. The law is not a boundary, it is a minefield, and only the ruler decides which mines explode. And yet, like every mechanism of control, selective law enforcement contains its own weakness. By making the law unpredictable, rulers weaken the respect for law itself. People stop seeing it as sacred and begin to see it as a performance, a tool of manipulation. In moments of crisis, when fear loosens its grip, this realization can ignite powerful change. If enough people decide that the law no longer has legitimacy, selective enforcement collapses, because its power was never in the law itself, but in the belief that the law mattered. Once that belief evaporates, so does the ruler's authority. Still, while the system holds, it is suffocating. It creates a world where compliance is never enough, where innocence is never protection, where the only true defense is submission or silence. And that is the ultimate purpose. Not justice, not order, but uncertainty. A ruler who enforces selectively does not need to control every action. They only need to control the horizon of possibility, keeping everyone guessing, keeping everyone cautious, keeping everyone too afraid to step beyond the invisible lines. Selective law enforcement is not about punishing the guilty or protecting the innocent. It is about keeping everyone off balance, suspended in a permanent state of doubt. And in that doubt, power thrives, not because it is fair, but because it is unpredictable. And when people no longer know where they stand, they stop moving at all. Confusion doctrine. Imagine living in a state where laws are announced with great ceremony, but the moment you try to follow them, you find another decree that contradicts the first. Taxes are demanded, but in multiple forms, with different officials claiming different rights. One proclamation promises freedom, while another restricts it. The people are left bewildered, uncertain of what is truly required of them. In this world, the ruler never offers stability or clarity. Instead, they weaponize confusion itself. This is the confusion doctrine, the deliberate flooding of society with conflicting decrees, contradictory policies, and shifting rules so that people become dependent on the ruler or the bureaucracy for interpretation. Order is not found in the law, but in the favor of the one who explains the law. The psychology of this doctrine is devastatingly effective. Humans crave consistency. We want to know the rules of the game, even if the rules are harsh. If rules are stable, we can adapt. But when rules change constantly, or clash against each other, people are paralyzed. They fear making the wrong choice, fear stepping outside an unclear boundary. And in this paralysis, they seek guidance from the very authority that created the confusion. Power flows not from the law itself, but from the person who interprets it. One historical example is the Byzantine Empire, where emperors often issued overlapping legal codes and edicts. A noble or merchant could be in compliance with one set of rules but in violation of another. This gave the emperor tremendous leverage. He could prosecute anyone at any time by choosing which law to enforce. Confusion was not an accident, it was a design that allowed selective punishment. The people did not obey laws, they obeyed the emperor's interpretation of laws. The confusion doctrine thrives in authoritarian systems. In the Soviet Union under Stalin, laws were intentionally vague. Crimes such as counter-revolutionary activity or anti-Soviet agitation could mean almost anything. A worker who complained about bread shortages could be guilty. A poet who wrote a subtle criticism could be guilty. And yet, others who did the same might be spared, if they had the right patron, or if the authorities decided not to enforce the law that day. The confusion created fear, and fear created obedience. Citizens stopped trying to understand the system. They simply waited for officials to tell them what was safe. But the doctrine also extends into more subtle realms. Consider bureaucratic democracies, where regulations and laws pile up endlessly, often contradicting each other. A business owner may find one regulation demanding one thing, while another demands its opposite. The state then becomes amazed that no one can navigate without constant appeals to officials, consultants, or politicians. This dependency breeds corruption and control. The powerful are not bound by the rules, because they control the interpretation of the rules. Everyone else is trapped in uncertainty. The brilliance of the confusion doctrine lies in its invisibility. Unlike purges or censorship, it does not appear overtly violent. Instead, it cloaks itself in complexity. Citizens may even blame themselves, thinking, if only I were smarter, I would understand. But the confusion is engineered. It is a smokescreen designed to shift power from written law to personal authority. And once people accept that clarity can only come from the ruler's power becomes absolute. There is also a moral dimension. When people live under constant contradictions, they lose their sense of right and wrong. If one day the law says something is legal, and the next day illegal, morality itself becomes relative. People stop thinking in terms of principles, and instead think in terms of survival. What does the ruler want today? What does the official demand in this moment? This erodes independent thought, replacing it with dependence on authority. Modern regimes still use this tactic. In some countries, governments issue sweeping censorship rules with vague language. Citizens are told not to publish harmful content or offensive speech, but no one knows exactly what those terms mean. One writer is punished for a harmless joke, while another is ignored for sharper criticism. The confusion is deliberate. It forces people into self-censorship. If you cannot know the boundary, you avoid the boundary entirely. In this way, the doctrine suppresses dissent without needing to ban every word outright. The confusion doctrine can also be seen in corporate and institutional life. When leaders constantly shift strategies, issue contradictory orders, or change expectations, employees become dependent on the leader's mood or explanation. Initiative dies, innovation suffocates, and obedience becomes the safest path. In this sense, the doctrine is not only political, but psychological. It trains people to stop trusting themselves and to wait for permission before acting. But like all control strategies, the confusion doctrine carries risks. Too much confusion can destabilize the system itself. If officials contradict each other too often, corruption spirals out of control. If citizens lose all trust in the rules, they may stop obeying altogether, plunging the state into chaos. The doctrine works best when confusion is thick enough to paralyze but not so overwhelming that the system collapses. It is a delicate balance. Too much clarity threatens the ruler, but too much disorder threatens the state. The confusion doctrine is powerful because it makes the law itself irrelevant. It replaces justice with interpretation, consistency with dependency, and truth with uncertainty. In such a world, the only safe path is obedience, and the only clarity comes from the hand of power. It is not chaos, it is manufactured chaos, sculpted with precision, until confusion itself becomes the foundation of control.